When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Didn't file with TurboTax last year? That's in the past. Now, Taxes is getting the TurboTax app and filing your own taxes for free if you didn't file with them last year. File by February 18th. All tax forms, all 100% free. Now, this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. New filers and filers who didn't use TurboTax last year only must start and file your own taxes in-app by February 18th. Excludes TurboTax Live. Full terms at TurboTax.com.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the Vehicle Owner's Manual for important feature limitations and information.
Hey Atlanta, say hello to Small Business Help from Apple. That's right, we're here to make starting and running your business simpler. From helping you choose the right devices to setting them up hassle-free, we can help you build your business in no time. Speak to a business expert and get the help you need at no cost whatsoever. At Apple, we're open for your small business. Go to apple.com/smallbusiness or visit an Apple store to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Welcome back to another exciting edition of the Pointless Exercise Podcast. It's time for a special edition of Remember This Crap. Not only do we have a third member of the crew today, but we are remembering this collapse in honor of the David Ross's last ride, the 2023 Chicago Cubs. We are going to compare and contrast the choke of the 2023 Cubs with other famous collapses in history. And I don't know what order you're going to hear these in, but there's going to be a companion version of this with earlier collapses with our good friend Hockey Night. He didn't want me to call. I called him by his name last time. He didn't like that. So what are we supposed to call him?
Well, he's Hockey Night, but if we're talking baseball, I believe it's fully Croizon.
Fully
Croizon. He doesn't have nearly as much brand cash shit with that one, but whatever. Either one.
He doesn't keep that site up too well these days.
It wasn't quite the lightning in a bottle that Hockey Night was because of circumstances that existed around the time of Hockey Night, I would say. But yeah,
so
our buddy Forklift.
That one we're going to start with the mother of all, the 1969 Cubs. And we'll work our
wish
way
my
forward,
dad was still around here that one.
But
well, instead of your dad, you got to settle for Forklift instead, because his old balls were in Wrigley Field during that season, whereas the rest of us weren't alive.
We weren't even around. No, he could lie to us. We wouldn't have any idea if he's telling the truth or not. But tonight we are going to start with with Don Baylor's fabulous 2001 Cubs team. And joining Mike Donahue and me is another friend of the podcast, Mike Praznowski. Praz, how are you?
I'm doing well, Andy. This is somewhat of like a bat signal for me. When I hear Cubs chokes, I when I heard that you were going to be doing this, my antenna immediately went up on stuff that need to relive and possibly pass out drunk over.
So the idea behind this was, as the 23 Cubs were careening into the ditch, I kept seeing parallels to the 2004 Cubs. And that's what started this thought. So we should compare it to that. And thought, no, let's not just compare it to that. Let's compare it to all of them.
There's a whole litany.
There's one big difference between the 2023 Cubs and the 2004 Cubs. 2004 Cubs were actually good.
Ooh. And then the flip side is that they were just unlikable, whereas this team kind of likable, actually. But we'll get. I mean, I'm just not to push the narrative. Just interesting.
Except the manager and the left
right
fielder and the third baseman.
Yeah, they were good. Got a shot.
But anyway, the 2001 Cubs, of course, we have remembered this craps on the 2001 Cubs, 2004 Cubs, and the 2009 Cubs. But it never stopped us from rehashing stuff before. So why would it stop us now? Although if you want to stop the podcast right here and go listen to all three of those, you can come back in like 9 hours, and then you can just pick this one up.
I don't want to brag, but I feel like our 2001 one was one of our finest works because there was a lot of weird shit that happened that year, and it was a fun year because it's a rare season in which the Cubs did not suck from April through, well, at least through August.
I mean, I admire the 2001 Cubs attempt to break the momentum by asking Osama bin Laden to perpetrate a terror attack in New York to give them a few days off so they could regroup.
If you
it was good hustle. It's not good. I mean, it was bad. Objectively, it's bad. One of the But Andy McPhail has connections that we didn't even know about.
When you compare, it was bad, but sometimes I wonder when you compare it to that lead-changing 3-run walk-off to Preston Wilson a week earlier. Nah, maybe I shouldn't compare. But
yeah. Well, they were a game and a half out at that point when the pause happened.
But
or
they
at least out of a wild card spot.
So the one thing that, like, when we've talked about it, Andy, the 2001 Cubs, for those of us that were not around in '69 and really kind of came into consciousness like 1980, is that the Cubs were so bad for so many years, and then '84 came out of nowhere, and they went all the way and went to the playoffs for the first time in 39 years, and then went back to sucking. And then '89 they came out of nowhere and went to the playoffs and went back to sucking, and then it felt like, we're not going to talk about 95 because that was an aberration, strike related, until 2001. And this really is more of a negative point, but until 2001, we had never actually seen the Cubs legitimately compete for the postseason and then fade.
Right.
There were two instances, 80-49, where they competed and they closed the deal. And 1995 accepted. Every other season, they were, fucking toast before Labor Day. So it was strange because, I remember arguing with people on message boards in 2001. Mike, what were you born? You're 7 years old at this time, right?
I was born in '94. 2001 Cubs were the first Cubs team that I was consciously aware of. And
I'm sorry.
But hey, it was a fun season though.
It was.
It was one of Sammy's best. Yeah.
Well, it was. If you want to look for the most ridiculously successful offensive season by an individual, you'll find it in that season with Sammy. He carried the team on offense, which it was the steroid era, so it was hard to really focus on that. It was just, as far as we knew, the Cubs were legitimately in contention. They got off to a good start. They just, it was strange. But what I was annoyed about, though, being on the message boards, was everyone was like, "Oh, the Cubs always choke," and I was like, "Asshole, they don't choke. They just don't compete." But usually, if they're there, they're there. And I'm only talking two instances at that point in 20 years. But so it was kind of bittersweet to actually see them. And it's fair to call it a collapse, Andy, right? I mean, you probably got the numbers in front of you. See the trends, the high points. In spite of the fact that it was a one-man show on offense, it was not like a smoke and mirrors. So
so on September 10th, they beat the Braves, but that broke a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
The Braves or the Reds?
The Braves. Oh no, you're right. On the 10th. The 10th, they beat the Reds. They had just been swept by the Braves. They had lost 5 in a row and 6 out of 7, and they had fallen from. Let's see. They had fallen 6 games out in the division
Yep.
They were in third place. And looking shit up on them. And they in the wild card race, they would have been one. They were third, game and a half behind the Giants. So they were still in the pennant, in the playoff chase. Let's see, they
were fading. We just didn't want to accept it.
I knew it was happening, and so because I remember thinking, they need a few days off.
I'll point to you where the collapse kind of began, and it's like when the calendar flipped from July to August. August 1st,
when they traded.
They woke up.
Is that what you're gonna say?
Well, that motherfucker finally showed up after hemming and hawing. But they were in first place on August 1st with a 4.5 game lead, 18 games over 500 on August 1st, and the rubber match of the series on August 2nd was one of the three. There were 3 games that punctuate this whole collapse, and we did talk about it when we went over 2001. But the rubber match on the third or on the second on Thursday, that was a game where you'll see that former Cub Chuck McElroy was the winning pitcher for the Padres, but that was the game where Jason Bray was just cruising. Don Baylor pulled him. Jeff Facera, who had been fantastic all year, but was getting used a little bit too much, loaded the bases, and Ryan Klesko hit I think bottom of the 8th inning grand slam. It wasn't a walk-off. Turned the game around. And I feel like that game, boom, you lose a game like that on the 1st of August. They didn't actually lose any in the standings that day, but they never climbed any higher than 4.5 in first place.
Yeah, they actually had a 6-game lead on as late as June 22nd.
Yeah.
When handsome David Weathers. No, that's not right. He was pitching for the John.
Right.
Let's see. They lost that day.
He would become a Cub that year, though. It's funny you mentioned that.
Yeah.
His arm was
when I looked, I thought it was him.
He was done.
He beat Kerry Wood. The day before,
I remember
John Lieber had outdueled Andy Bennis of the Cardinals. That's what got him up by 6.
Okay.
21st.
Mike?
There was a long stretch of that season where they were the best team in the National League, if I remember correctly, right?
Could be.
Well, it's hard to argue that with a lineup like, it's star-studded. Todd Hundley, Matt Stairs,
June 22nd,
Eric Young, Ricky Gutierrez,
wow,
All-Star and former Cub and All-Star Ron Coomer.
Yeah.
Gary Matthews Jr. and
Ron D.L. White.
Yes.
Or was he?
Rondell. That was
no. Whenever he was healthy, he was awesome. He was really
incredible.
healthy,
though.
So
some guy named you guys were talking about how Sammy had his best season. I mean, come on, this is all he did. This is not. I don't find any of this terribly impressive. He had 328 with a 437 on base. He slugged 737.
1.2.
He had 64 homers and drove in 160 runs. Is that a lot?
Yeah. It didn't lead the National League that year because he didn't lead the National League any of the years that he hit 60.
He hit 60 homers. Right. That's right.
Right.
Here we go. Who had the second most RBI on the 2001 Cubs?
Listeners of the show will know that I believe that Ricky Gutierrez, and it was it wasn't 100 behind, but it was 66 maybe.
It was 66, exactly. 94.
Wow,
he got within 94 RBIs.
Yeah, almost 100. Almost 100. That's second.
Matt Stairs drove in 61.
But I kind of feel that wasn't that much of an anomaly, right? That's the year before Beroy took the Giants to the series. This is really in the thick of all of that. So there are probably other teams, maybe. I don't know.
Well, here's the thing, right? So
maybe
you're in the steroid era. Why did the Cubs only have one?
Right.
Give Sammy some help. Load up some of the other guys. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Rondell only played 95 games, but he had 307 with a 371 on base and a 529. So he had a 900 OPS, 17 homers, 50 RBIs in 95 games. If he stays healthy, Cubs probably win the World Series and don't even lose a playoff game.
That's right. 9/11
because their pitching staff also very
exactly. That little flare that Luis Gonzalez hit to win the World Series, that could have been Rondell White.
That's right. So the funny thing too, I noticed, and I remember, but I looked it up, that in the month of May, this Cubs team, they suffered a 9-game losing streak, immediately followed by a 12-game winning streak.
That's very.
So,
what year? What year were the Brewers start? Then they start 13-0 and then lost 12 in a row.
Yeah.
Oh, 87 with the Dale Swaim walk-off.
But it almost reminds me of this past season Cubs teams where they would have stretches where they had multiple stretches where they looked really shitty and looked really good. But
let's see. I mean, it's one of my favorite Cubs teams, the 0-1 Cubs, because I love bums, and man, they had a lot. Oh, we didn't talk about why was All-Star and former Cub Ron Coomer, why was he playing so much at third base? He was supposed to just be the backup corner infield guy. Right,
because the Busch Stadium chewed up Bill Miller's leg. Yeah,
that tarp was responsible for 2 fatalities.
Right,
it ate Vince Coleman in the '85 World Series, or '87
World Series. Yep.
And it shattered Bill Miller's knee. When he was ripping it up, he was leading the National League in hitting at 295. Well, probably not leading it. He won a batting title after that for the Red Sox.
He did. He was good hitter. I like that.
Could make a case for 3, including another Cub with Nomar in 05.
Well, I had to man, if the tarp hit him, man, that's bad.
Was that in St. Louis?
That was in St. Louis.
Are we going to blame the tarp for taking out the did it vault Addison Russell into that guy's nachos? Do you remember that when he destroyed the nachos and then the Cubs sent new nachos to the fans?
In the broadcast, I kept focusing on it.
I remember that.
So 6 games up June 22nd, 4.5 up where they could have been 5.5 up August 1st. But again, in the wild card era, a team that's 18 games over 500 on August 1st. That's it's not an epic collapse, but Jesus, guys, what did they do from that point? They were 62-44, and then from that point they 26-30.
A couple of things happened when they got Fred McGriff. Don Baylor instituted the all bunt offense. They just bunted all the time.
He always did that, though.
He loved to bunt.
He used to bunt. He used to bunt.
Guy fucking managed in Colorado, the place where you should never bunt ever. Because you always have the potential of like a 9-run inning. Don't give away any outs. And he loved to bunt there. And then he loved to bunt in Wrigley, too. The 2 most offensive-friendly ballparks of that time. And just giving out every once in a while. We got to get he was obsessed with scoring first.
He would bunt, in the first inning. Eric Young, Eric Young had a very good 2000 when the Cubs sucked. And he didn't really step up in 01 when they actually could have used him. But regardless, EY led off, Gutierrez bat second, and whenever Eric Young got on base in the first inning, Baylor almost without fail would have Gutierrez lay one down. That would not happen today, thankfully.
So
and I don't.
It's funny. It jumps off the page at you. Eric Young played 15 years in Major League Baseball, and if you look at his sacrifice hits column, you can find 2001 pretty fast because 15.
Sacrifice hits.
Yeah. Sacrifice. Oh, yeah, that's sacrifice.
That's technically what it goes into the scorebook as a sacrifice hit when you sack bunt. Yeah.
As because there's also a sacrifice fly column next to it, so you do not confuse.
Can you tell me? I'm curious now that you stumbled across this. How many Gutierrez had? Because it was Gutierrez who would actually be giving himself up.
That's right. He would have been the Jay Bell in that.
Jay Bell. Jay Bell.
17.
Yeah. 17 outs.
The Cubs had
almost one a week.
The Cubs had 4 players with at least 10 sacrifice bunts.
4 non-pitchers.
Well, 2
in the non-DH era.
Okay. Kerry Wooden and Julian Tavares. That was the year of his anti-gay tirade, right?
Yeah, it was. It was.
Oh boy,
10-game winner that year. Though he was a decent number 4 starter for him, though. Otherwise,
but Miguel Cairo, who we know didn't make the whole season because they lost him on waivers.
Yep.
To the Cardinals. He had 9. It's funny though. I remember people made like a well, he wasn't terrible. 285, 364, 374. Not Miguel not going to ever get to second base.
Yeah.
Very Matt Merton-esque.
But good savvy by Miguel. He jumped ship and landed on the team that made the playoffs instead.
Yep. Although they got knocked out by the Diamondbacks.
Guess this. Of course, this happened. So with the Cubs, he slugged 374 in 66 games. With the Cardinals, he slugged 576 in 27 games. That's because here's the difference, right? The Cubs only pumping all the steroids into one guy. The Cardinals, everybody gets it.
Like Dave Duncan was like,
time for your B12 shot,
right?
Miguel.
He's like, Dave Duncan had a whole row of like the same key copy. He would just give one of them. This is my medicine cabinet.
Yeah.
I mean, didn't they literally? Wasn't it Dave McKay that was in charge of the medicine cabinet?
Was it McKay? Yeah.
And then he
right.
came to the Cubs.
Was the
he was the Cubs
coach.
first base coach, and he didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't give him. He wasn't in charge of the medicine cabinet.
Maybe he gave some to Alfonso Soriano.
That's
I
right.
remember
I was gonna
Alfonso
say
Soriano improving a little more.
That was the thing that Dave
McKay
McKay was supposed to do, was turn Alfonso Soriano into an outfielder. That was his.
Oh, man.
So I just to sort of put it in context, between that Klesko homer on the 2nd of August when the Cubs could have gone up, I guess 4 or 5.5. A month later, they're no longer in first place, but they're still 16 games over 500, 17 games over 500 on Monday I guess it's Labor Day. Now it's the Preston Wilson home run. That's another one. You have the win in your hand, and Tom Gordon comes in and fucks it up. That fucker, he missed the first month of the season that year too. He signed a contract when he wasn't, in position to play. But even then, it's for the division. After that game, they were still only 3 games out. So, yeah, they're in a wild card. They're there.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike Big Wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
And what happens, After 9/11, there's the walk-off then, too. That's the Brady. That's the compliment to Preston Wilson. September 18th. By then, they're 7 back. Kind of felt like it was over on that one. And there's still like 3 weeks to play. And then we didn't even get into, you talked about Miguel Cairo blasting for the Cardinals. You mentioned Gary Matthews Jr. Didn't he show up in a game like even later in the season when the Cubs were still hanging on in Pittsburgh? That guy didn't do shit, hit a homer like late. It was just a terrible month of September for all Americans, but especially Cub fans.
Yeah, so the Cubs, when the season paused, it was a game against the Reds at Wrigley. When they resumed 8 days later, they just picked up the schedule where it was, right?
Yep.
That was the game with Sammy running out with the flag.
That's right, and they lost that game.
No, that was the first. That had to be the first home game, right?
They were in Cincinnati when 9/11
on the 18th,
hit?
They were in Cincinnati. That was the Brady Clark walk-off against them.
The makeup. Oh, you're right. I got that confused. You're right. Okay. Why did I? No, they were in Chicago. They were in Chicago on September 10th when they won because I feel like Roosevelt Brown went off, and then
they had 8 days off,
and then they made up those games at the end. I got you. Okay. So they were still playing the Reds by coincidence, but they were in Cincinnati.
Well, and was that an originally scheduled game against the Reds? Okay.
It would have been. And in that game, like Todd Walker hit a homer, put him up. There was they're barely hanging on. And then just like with Preston Wilson, fucking Brady Clark comes up. This time it's Farnsworth on the mound, not Tom Gordon. And there's 2 outs though. So get the guy out, we win by a run. And there's 2 guys on. Brady Clark hits like a fly to right, just not even that well hit. They just lands right inside the foul line. I don't know who the right fielder, but Sammy, who was just so bulked up that he was really not much of an outfielder. He was a decent outfielder in the mid '90s, right? Or at least as far as getting to a ball and throwing it back in. But
getting the ball and then throwing home when he had no chance to get the guy and throwing it 3/4 of the way up the screen. That was
what's the one famous stat about him in the 1 year with the White Sox where he had double digits in homers, doubles, triples, outfield assists, errors,
caught
double
stealing,
plays rounded into, caught stealing, stolen bases. Yeah.
And I think that his defense, if he would have had it, like, I don't ever feel like I blame Sammy for that. And it wasn't always the hugest. I just think it was a fluky fucking hit. But goddamn it, Farnsworth, strike the motherfucker. It's Brady Clark. Brady Clark. You guys remember Brady Clark? He later resurfaced
with the Brewers.
Brewer star too.
Yep.
Yeah. So like you get that motherfucker out, you win that game. It's just like there's just too many crushing defeats here. The San Diego game with Klesko, Preston Wilson, Brady Clark, and then like Sarge Matthews Jr. a few days later, just because it felt like it was over after that Reds game. Like, hey, after 9/11, there's baseball again. Like, maybe they shouldn't have come back.
But so that's the weird thing, right? We all remember. Well, at least you and I remembered. Sammy hit that home run in the first game back. Billy Williams had the little American flag in his pocket and gave it to Sammy as he rounded. That was the 27th of September.
It's against Houston, yeah.
This is not the Mike Piazza walk-off at Shea. This is 2.5 weeks. This is over 2 weeks later. It's still cool. Because there was everybody and I know why, because every team as they finally went home for their first game.
Yes, it was.
Everybody was all amped up, and everybody screamed along with the anthem, and people cry. That's why. But it's funny, and over time you just assume that happened when they first got back. No, we had to wait half a month for that to happen.
True.
Yeah. I got to say that is like, as someone who probably didn't pay as much attention to that era as you guys did, it's one to look back on and get a little confused by, because you have 03 where they go 88-74 and win the division, but then you have these 2 years right around there, 01 and 04, where they don't even make the playoffs and don't really come particularly close to winning the division. And it's like, what the hell happened in 03 where that was just good enough to win the division?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It was Jim Edmonds pulled an oblique in the home run derby at Comiskey.
02.
That was like the thing that was 03.
03
Dusty was managing the National League because he had been the National League manager in the World Series the year before. He managed on a different team. But that really happened. Edmonds' second half was terrible. And he hurt himself in the home run derby. Tough shot.
I like it. That'll work.
Wow. That had to be the beginning of the buzz of all the people saying, "Oh, you shouldn't send your stars to the home run derby because it will screw with them."
Tell that to Sammy, who basically his entire season was the home run derby was like the highlight of Sammy's year, and then the rest of it was just
correct.
There are balls in Atlanta that are still traveling from that. But that's the only derby he won. I don't remember, but I know he won that one.
Atlanta Turner Field, I'm guessing, obviously.
Yeah,
it's a football stadium now, but there's still a baseball orbiting it that Sammy hit.
Oh, they didn't knock it down?
No, it's a college football stadium now.
Same with the Rangers' old stadium in Texas.
It's whatever school
the ballpark.
Bill Curry started the football program there, remember?
Bill Curry from Alabama? Old Baltimore told you to see in NFL films, scared to death to talk about Dick Butkus.
Yep. Huh. All right, 1990, Sammy Sosa with the White Sox. 26 doubles, 10 triples, 15 homers, 32 stolen bases.
Wow.
He had double-digit walks, 33.
Then?
Compared to only 150 strikeouts.
Back then, of course, that's a lot.
10 double plays. Did I say 16 caught stealings? So yeah, I
He did
mean, he
not,
was
but-
good for, and his OPS was even double digits, 92. It wasn't 100, it was 92.
And how old is Sammy that year?
He is air quotes 21.
And honestly, a guy with his speed, those double plays actually probably speak more to how hard he was hitting the ball, and that rather than just rolling over, like because he was fast.
Well,
so
but
if he's
you
hitting
don't-
double
you know,
plays,
Sam-
he's probably hitting rockets at guys that are
He was
making
really
plays.
raw back then, and he would do the home run hop on ground balls,
Out of the
which would slow him down, and they just get him at first on double plays. Sammy, don't do the hop when it's a grounder. What? Like, no. And he would blow kisses to the camera after double plays. It was great.
It's kind of nuts
man.
that the 2001 Cubs only finished 5 games out at the end of the division. Like it really was theirs for they were back 6-7 games most of September, but when the season wound up, so then it just makes those games that they blew,
Well, no,
feel
you know
even
what
more.
happened? This is literally true, right? The minute they really fell out of contention, guess who took off like a shot?
The Astros.
No, when the Cubs were like, okay, well, we're out of it now. Fred McGriff. Well, all of a sudden, Fred couldn't make it out.
Yeah.
That son of a bitch. I can't believe they let him in the Hall of Fame. Actually, here I have it on authority that Andre doesn't want them to take the logo off. He doesn't want to change the logo from the Expos to the Cubs on his hat. He wants them to let him in. He's going to rip the Fred McGriff plaque off the wall and just take it home with him. Say, fuck that guy.
I can get behind that.
Yeah. I don't know if we're about to be moving off of 2001, but one thing I just wanted to mention.
Final thoughts.
The end of all this is that it was notable for a big season from Sammy, but also John Lieber won 20 games that season.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Yep. That would be the last time a Cub pitcher would win 20 games until Jake Arrieta in 2015. One thing that you guys have brought up on previous Remember This Craps is that anytime a Cubs pitcher wins 20 games, he comes back to the Cubs later in his career as a lesser form of himself.
Yep.
That might not be true with John Lieber, because during his first stint with the Cubs, if you take that entire 4-year stint, his ERA during that time from 99 to 02 was 4.03. In 2008 with the Cubs, it was 4.05.
Sample size, Mike.
Here's the thing. When he came back in 08, he had a much bigger pair of pants.
And
that's true.
I mean, he had a big ass the whole time, but it was really big.
I know it's anecdotal. It didn't support what Mike said because he's cheating with the small samples. But yeah, the eye test was like, holy shit, he's just not good anymore. I'm surprised his ERA wasn't 7 or 8 though, because I just felt like he was going to get hurt out there.
Well, weirdly, he had a better ERA in 02 the next year than he did in 01 during the 20 win season.
It's funny. Smaller sample. He got hurt that year finally.
Yeah, in 02,
yeah.
right? Remember why he got hurt, right?
Doubleheader. Dusty had him go back out after a long stretch, right?
Well, it was in Dusty. We can blame everything on Dusty, but we can't blame this on Dusty.
That's right.
Yeah,
was it Bruce Kim at the time?
No,
it was they made him. He came back after. Yeah,
I think it was Baylor.
After the rain delay.
Yeah,
they had like a 90-minute rain delay, and he had him come out and finish the game. And then he pitched poorly for a couple of games, and then he was gone because he had.
But I appreciate Mike. I appreciate Mike making the John Lieber reference. It was a fine year for John Lieber. Always one of my favorite pitchers because he worked fast.
Still a terrible.
When I coach,
still he didn't win that trade.
Well, but when I coach, I make John Lieber references. You got a kid that works fast and throws strikes. Yeah, it reminds me of John Lieber. So.
Well, one other thing I want to bring up with John Lieber, so he gets injured at the end of 02. Do you guys think that if he stays healthy throughout 02, that they have some consideration in bringing him back for 03 at all, or?
Because I think he was going to be on the shelf for so long. He did come back and have some success. He was on that Yankees team that blew the 3-0 lead against Boston. He was a starter in that rotation. He did. He was still a good pitcher between when he left and came back. I don't think he would have been healthy enough in 03 though. And they had, the problem in 03 wasn't their rotation, but for the fact that Matt Clement was too much of a pussy to come in from the bullpen. But.
If he comes back, Sean Estes isn't on the team. Nobody wins a consecutively game against the Reds until the last week of the season. And the Cubs don't make the playoffs.
Yeah,
All right, so
imagine all those wonderful games Huey would have missed out on.
So one last thing from 01. So on the Cubs, the most games they were ever out of first place happened on September 24th. They fell 9 games out. It was the 4th loss in a row of what would eventually be 5. So that's pretty much it. They're toast. From that moment on, here are Fred McGriff's stats. He had 326 with a 400 on base, a 791 slug for a 1.191 OPS, 6 homers, and 14 RBIs.
Probably made the whole thing on that
Just
stretch
as soon
alone.
as it was awful, it was time for Fred to make his stats look great. Thanks.
That's ridiculous.
Oh my God.
I don't know if there's. I mean, I guess the whole idea here is we're supposed to compare what happened then to what happened.
Eventually, we'll have to do it with like a Google poll though, because Frank's not. When we're done. I mean, like, where would this rank when we're done? Right now, it's number 1 because it's the only one we've talked about.
Yeah, it's the worst. Oh, is that what we're doing? At the end, we're going to rank all
I don't know,
of the,
right? I think we all know which one we're going to vote on is the worst, but like, let's discuss it. That's why we're here, right?
All right.
Or maybe which one is the most comparable to 2023.
Okay, we can do
well,
both.
we can do it as we go. We can do this part. We can do worse. Which one was worse? We'll do this for every one of them.
Okay.
2023.
Yeah.
2001.
That's right. It's like a tournament. All right. And then look what's next.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough to top that one.
That's true.
Although I know one that people will argue for 2001 was worse than 2023.
I wasn't talking about 23. I was talking about the one that comes after 2001. I think.
No, but I was saying I think what we can do as we go through this is we can compare.
Was
this worse than this year we just lived?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
As far as the choke, and the reason I think the choke is worse is that this was the 23 Cubs weren't in first place.
Yeah. They collapse as much.
They didn't get off to a good start. Then they went to Oakland and beat the shit out of the A's, and then they were awful for like a full month.
Yeah,
and they spent the rest of the time just hanging out trying to get to those 3 wild card spots. Where these Cubs were, they were in go for it mode. I mean, come on, they had all kinds of superstars. Michael Tucker.
Hey, he was a trade deadline acquisition. So was Delano DeShields.
Fred McGriff, and then we haven't even talked about. When on deadline day, when Ed Lynch is wheeling and dealing, and he's putting the Cubs over the top with trades for Felix Heredia and Matt Karchner.
That's 1998. Sorry.
That was 98?
Yeah, 01 was Tucker and Delano DeShields. See, 98, those fuckers closed the deal. So, they're not part of this discussion.
Oh, but Felix, I got distracted. Here's why I got distracted. Because Felix was still there and still terrible.
Oh, God,
2001, Felix Heredia, his ERA was 6.17 in 48 games. Yeah, you're right. I'm a little drunk.
Wow.
Oh, my God.
35 innings.
48 games.
35 innings in 48 games.
Oh, my God. I would not have guessed that Heredia was still on that team 3 years after his disastrous arrival. Wow.
He struck out 28 guys. Those 28 guys should have been immediately released. Oh, but 01 was the Todd Van Poppel resurgence.
2000 Todd Van Poppel resurgence.
He actually pitched better in 2000. He was like emerging as their closer. He was, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was 4-1 with a 2.52 ERA in 59 games, 75 innings. He only gave up 63 hits, struck out 90, only walked 38.
Be willing to bet
did the Cubs get the only good years out of Todd?
Yeah, I'd be willing to bet that Todd Van Poppel's best years were with the Cubs.
I have to ask you guys, was there like a little bit of a 2015 feeling going into 2001 in that, like,
no,
you had
that's a good. I'm glad you brought this up. They were building to nothing. This was a ragtag bunch of like shitty veterans. Like they weren't even good ones. Even the guys. McGriff at least was a name when they got him. Everybody else, even the guys they were adding, they were plucking guys off the waiver wire.
You just mentioned Michael Tucker, Delano DeShields. The year before they were asked.
Corey Patterson did play in 2001.
I was just going to bring up Corey Patterson because you did have a little bit of prospect hype, kind of.
But he was too raw, and he was pressed into cert. He was actually called up in September the year before. He was drafted 98. Like you had Kerry Wood, you had some pieces, I guess, but like like going into the season, you didn't have any more optimism than you normally would, just out of dumb spring, April optimism. But they were coming off a 90-loss season in Baylor's first year, and then, the next year they would go back in the shitter. It was a weird season, Mike. It's a good question. They were not building. It was out of the blue. Like I said, just like 84 and 89. And the difference was in 84 and 89, they closed the deal in 2-1. We actually got to see him fade away for the first time.
To put a button on the Todd Van Poppel observation. So here are his ERA pluses in his career for the different teams. In 5 years in Oakland, 77. 3 years with the Rangers, 75. 2 years with the Reds, 74. 1 year with the Pirates, 82. 1 year with the Tigers, 45. 2 years with the Cubs, 138.
Wow.
Got good use out of him there.
Yeah, did he fish himself like a real contract out of those 2 years? He pitched after the wow. Well, considering though, no matter what, it was all going to be short because Todd Van Poppel. I don't know if that's a name you'd recognize otherwise, but he was almost a celebrity in 1990, Mike. Because we've talked about it, Andy, because he was the number one pick. He would have been the number one pick in the draft, and actually, as an 18-year-old, basically tried to use his leverage to not get drafted. You'll like this. By the soon-to-be emergent Atlanta Braves. Yeah. But the Atlanta Braves were ass.
I feel bad for the Braves, too. Because remember who they had to settle for then instead of Todd Van Poppel?
Was it like Chipper or somebody?
Yeah, Chipper Jones.
Jesus. And then, of course, they already had Glavine and Smoltz and Avery that are just about to hit. And then, so
Maddox would join them soon. Yeah.
But they were ass. The Braves were such ass in the 80s. And the A's with La Russa, they won 3 straight pennants, and that's where Van Poppel thought he could dictate where he'd go, and then he never quite materialized for them.
I'm sure we talked about this. The Cubs' first round pick. Do you remember in 1990 he pitched?
Lance Dixon.
Lance Dixon pitched 3 games for those. The
Cubs,
year
he
right?
got drafted.
Yeah,
the year he got drafted.
Never came back.
Never pitched again.
The guy picked right after him, also a 2001 Cub.
Not Todd Van Poppel, though.
Oh.
Rondell White. They could have just picked
go.
Rondell. And then think about it. Rondell would have played his whole career on the grass at Wrigley. He'd probably be a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
I could have had Rondell.
Who was the asshole making the picks in 90?
Jim Fry. You know that.
Oh, that's right. I'm surprised they picked anybody. How many times did they missed their turn? We're up again, Jim.
Well,
Jim's playing bridge. He's busy. Who do we supposed to take?
I think I remember this from one of the remember this crap episodes that was 2001 or 2000 the year where they had more Dallas Green draft picks on the roster.
2000.
Okay.
Yeah, the day Ed Lynch got fired, Joe Girardi and somebody else. I mean, Joe had come back, but he was still an original Dallas Green draft pick. There was nobody that Ed Lynch had drafted that was on that day's roster, and he'd been in charge for 6 years. And Dallas Green had been gone for 13. So yeah, and that day that Lynch was finally sent back, and Joe Girardi was the only draft pick between the two of them. I believe that's right. I might be off, but more or less proves the point, I think. So yeah, no. To answer that question, the 2001 came out of nowhere, and then,
and that's how it always.
Perfect.
That's to your point from before. That's how it always was in our lifetimes.
Right.
They never built anything. They just kept slapping guys on a team, and all of a sudden they'd be good.
2014.
And then they would convince themselves that was going to work, and they could try that again.
And then roll it back out the next year.
83 Cubs, shit. 85 Cubs, shit. 84, one of the greatest teams in Cubs history.
Right.
Actually, the one exception when we were young were the 89 Cubs.
Well, they should. You're right.
Because the 88 Cubs had talent on it. They had 6 All-Stars.
About it. Yeah.
And you really did feel like they were getting pretty good. But those were the Dallas Green picks, the Gordon Goldsberry picks that were
we broke that down. It wasn't even
Fry just torched it.
You're absolutely right. That was actually should have been a run-up. And we never knew it at the time. It's only in retrospect we autopsy. We're like, Jesus Christ, Green had been gone for 3 years, and they still had that team, and it was just being cut out from under. So that should have been it, but Jim Fry was so incompetent that he robbed us of that before we even could truly appreciate it.
I mean, that's one of the many things I find hilarious about Al Yellen is for his whole life basically. Although he's old enough, he remembers the '69 Cubs.
He's a boomer.
From the DeRocher Cubs on. One of the things the Cubs suffered from was a refusal to ever just go, we need to just start over. We just got to tear this shit down and build it up.
Until 2012.
Just wouldn't do it. So, yeah, finally Theo shows up, and he does it.
And that motherfucker.
Al waits a year and a half and writes his infamous, "How long must we wait?" Theo column.
Incredible.
Yes.
And the only equivalent to that is Hub Arkush giving up his season tickets before the 2015 season.
Yeah.
He had him his whole life. Fuck it. They're never going to win. And it's the 2 best years of our lives.
Yeah.
God.
I actually have a feeling somebody took those in bankruptcy court. I don't think he gave them. They were an asset he had to divest.
Yeah.
All right. Now on to everybody's favorite team. The 2004 Chicago Cubs. The opposite of the 2001 Cubs, right? Where the 01 Cubs, you got one really good player, and then you have Kerry, you have a good pitcher, and you're just slapping things around it.
Yeah.
Here's the 04 Cubs, playoff proven, now to a point, from the year before.
All right.
And it's just, there's really good players on this team.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be great. And it wasn't how long even into the season where it was like, well, I guess at least we're still a wild card. The Cardinals had run out and taken off with the division.
They did.
They won 104 games or something.
It was pretty crazy. And it was fun to see them never even have the lead in that year's World Series. Maybe it was cold comfort for what happened.
They were 105 and 57.
Yeah, they did. They passed the Cubs like they were standing still.
Yeah.
It did suck, though, that, with the NLCS being the Astros and Cardinals, one of those two teams was going to have to go to the World Series.
It's terrible.
None of us was going to enjoy it.
But, Mike, it's funny to your point. That concludes a 6-year period right before that where the Cubs had 2 teams that had better records than the 03 Cubs.
Well, 01 was equal. They were both 88 and 74.
Oh, they were. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But they were sort of out of the blue. This was supposed to be another ramp up. But the 03 team only won 88 games, but they made those. They were mediocre until they got Ramirez, at the trade deadline, who came back. So that was a big piece for 04. And then Derek Lee. And then Nomar later in that year. So between the 2 trade deadlines, between 03 and 04, a team that would in that time period, go on to come within 5 outs of a pennant would just continue to get better on paper, and yet they never. Yeah. So because you're right, opening day 03, a lot of holes. Mark Bellhorn is in that lineup. Corey Patterson.
Yep.
Was not opening day 04.
You had Aramis Ramirez. You had Derek Lee. You had
Nomar Short.
Not yet on opening day.
No,
he still had Alex Gonzalez.
Oh,
traded
right.
for him.
I'm sorry. You're right. And then it was My bad. Oh, but still, opening day, you at least had Ramirez and Lee on the corners, as opposed to Bellhorn and Hesop Choi.
Well, which was better? Really? Is it just a given that it's Lee and Ramirez?
Yeah. Has Aramis Ramirez
ever
hit home? Yeah, has he ever hit home runs from both sides of the place in a meaningless game in Milwaukee in 02? I don't think so.
I remember Bellhorn hit this inexplicably long home run in Pittsburgh. They have this I don't know if it's a parking garage, but there was some kind. I guess it's just a big spiral thing to get fans from the upper deck down.
Yeah.
And Bellhorn hit a right-handed home run that rattled around on that spiral thing. It was amazing. It was a bomb.
Wow.
Yeah, you're right. I just took my first.
My memories of Mark Bellhorn are that, and then he was always wet. I never understood why he was always wet.
Very sweaty.
Chase Utley was always wet too, but Bellhorn was always wet. The double flap helmet, because can't remember which one to grab, so just put foot flaps on both sides. And then he was an 04 Red Sox, right?
He and Bill Miller were 04 Red Sox, I believe.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough.
Theo knew where to get winners.
And
he was getting
Jimmy Anderson.
He was getting Mark Bellhorn.
Jimmy Anderson, really? Pizza Boy?
Yes.
This is Pizza Boy's. This is Pizza Boy's year here. But to get back to you guys were making a point about how the 2001 Cubs, the 88 wins all of a sudden, and then in 03 they win 88 games, and it's enough to win it. The weird thing was, it's such an aberration in the Central. In 2000, the Cardinals went with 95. In 01, the Cardinals and Astros both won 93 games. In fact, the Astros won the division because they won the head-to-head.
Okay.
And the Cardinals had to play in the wild card game. The Cardinals still have a thing on their fence that they won the division that year because they tied. But
Jesus.
Those fuckers.
2002, it took 97 wins. The Cardinals.
Yep.
Then in 03, the Cardinals only won 85. And then 04, 105, and 05, 100. And of course, the Cardinals don't win the World Series in any of those years. And then in 2006, they win 83 games.
83.
The Cubs pushed them into the playoffs.
They did. In 2011, they did too. But
2011 was also, it was the Cubs helping, and then the Braves. Like, the Braves could have clinched.
Collapsing.
Talk about a collapse. We should do remember this class for the Braves. They could have clinched the wild card 8 days in a row, and they just kept losing. And the Cardinals caught them on a final day. Unbelievable. It was like a 64 Phillies. Collapse.
Worse than almost, yeah.
Actually, I don't know if it was really 8. I remember thinking, oh, good, the Cardinals get eliminated today for several days. And they never did. And then they won the fucking World Series.
So it is interesting to put the 04 Cubs in the context of a collapse, because if you use the metrics that we used in 01, how many games were they up? Like you said, they were never in the division. So you almost have to just go by league metrics, wild card metrics, what their record was. They were underachieving all year. They were never, what's the highest they were never more than 15 games over 500. So it's definitely a collapse, but it was really the entire season was coming on the heels as it did in 03. Just a year-long frustrating series of we talked about it, going back to the very opening weekend at Wrigley when everyone's going nuts when Dusty's batting guys out of order and Alou and Sosa are going yard, and it's the place is packed and it's an unseasonably warm day in April, and it's chill, guys, we got 6 months of this, and it's so many things it's not, it is a collapse, but there are just so many dumb factors, just the players themselves were getting distracted. They were such a good team on paper. We've just kind of gone over practically every position.
Here's why even at the time it felt because they did collapse, because they literally choked
a
the
playoff spot
away with a week and a half to go.
Yeah.
But so we put it into context. The year before they stagger into the playoffs with 88 wins, and they play the 103 win Braves.
Mm-hmm.
At least 100 wins. At least 100.
Okay. The Giants had more,
them.
But yeah.
So here we are the next year. They're better. They have more talent than they had the year before. Yeah, the fucking Cardinals are going to win 105 games. We don't give a shit. We beat the Braves last year. Just get in the playoffs. You'll beat them. And then you get Nomar at the trade deadline, and you're like, aha, we're even better. Yeah. And then they played well after they got Nomar. And you're like, here we go. And then all of a sudden, it went. Yeah. This, to me, there were, we were talking about, this was the inspiration for this. There were things that would happen. There was the loss in Atlanta where Seiya loses the fly ball is basically the I guess the equivalent of the Ryan Dempster special in New York, right?
Sure.
In only the fact that they come home then and they have this easy set where they're going to play, and they just beat the shit out of the Pirates in the first game.
Yep.
And then they only win one more game on the homestand, which is exactly what happened to the old Cubs. They came back and they crushed the Reds, and they couldn't score a run until the last day of the year when they were eliminated. And Chip quit. So that's what we'll always remember. That celebration was the fact that Chip Carey quit that day.
I hope I don't trigger you guys by saying this, but as a 10-year-old at that time, I felt a little bit of sadness in hearing that Chip Carey was going away, if only because every Sammy Sosa memory I had at that time was with Chip Carey calling it and getting as loud as he did, swung on, belted.
But somehow you don't remember the surgery that your parents had to take you for your eardrums that were clearly punctured.
Didn't Dan Roan and Wayne Larrabee both get to call Big Sammy homers because Chip was off doing studio work for Fox?
I believe Dan Roan called that Orlando Merced game on that Saturday in September of '98 when Sosa hit 60. And it might have been Larrabee that Sunday, too. I don't know.
I think Chip
Larrabee
usually we
was
get back for the
football.
Sunday game. I think Chip did,
Yes.
because Chip was move over, Big Mac, you've got company.
That's right. He was in the booth for
Ah,
62
yes.
and 63 when I was in the bleachers.
There were
But
big
the
ones
day,
on
the day
run-up.
before was Dan Roan.
And I hated him enough by then already to, like, I wanted Sammy to do it for a lot of reasons. I wanted Sammy to hit it with Chip not there.
Dan Roan
I
on
wanted
the
to
call.
rob
that
him. I
would've been
wanted to
great.
milk toast Dan Roan, who as a kid, I grew up, not growing up
Yeah.
in Chicago. Dan Roan was the Illinois basketball play-by-play guy.
Oh, really?
Dick Martin. Roan and
Wait,
Martin.
you didn't have cable and thus WGN out? Where you were at? Because Dan Roan was the sports
No, we
guy
had
on Channel 9.
we had GM, but I experienced Dan. As a kid, I probably was
Okay.
not watching a lot of WGN.
I never knew that. He was the regular television.
Yeah.
What channel was Illinois on
They
back
were
then?
syndicated all over the state. So we
Right.
watched him on Channel
Okay.
30.
There you go.
Interesting. I never knew that.
That's why I knew who Dan Roan was. And then you would see him. I guess if Dad was watching the, I had to watch the farm.
a bit of a
GM,
bit of
you
a
get to see
Chicago
it.
institution, I guess. But sorry, let me open this.
The 2004 Cubs they were in first place as late as April 28th.
Yeah.
And their nadir, they were 17 and a half games out on September 8th.
Well, at what point after, like, say, the All-Star break, was there ever a point where they were ever within, say, like 4 or 5 games of first place?
No.
Good
Or would the
question.
Cardinals just build up that much of a cushion where it was totally unattainable?
The closest, they were 4 out on the 5th of July. And then
Okay.
they lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row. Which included losing the first 2 games of a series in St. Louis. Then they won. Carey beat Chris Carpenter on the Sunday to cut the lead back to 7, get them back in it.
Mm-hmm.
For most of August, they were double digits behind, including 15 games out on the 17th of August. It's funny. I was telling you. I remember they played really well when they got Nomar. Yeah, they won 4 in a row to start. And then they lost 3 out of 4 and like 6 out of 8.
I know.
That
We
was their
talked
big
about
problem.
it.
They never got. Every time you felt like they were getting it together, then they.
Here's the one game I just want to reference before we move on. And I know we talked about in 04 because I remember I was on the road in Bowling Green, Kentucky, watching this at like a Chili's bar next to the hotel I was staying at. They were 2 games out on going into St. Louis on June 22nd. And the first game they won on the 22nd. I remember watching that. I was still in Chicago. It was after a softball game. And Ramos, God love him, he had a huge hit off of Isringhausen, like turned the game around, like the top of the 9th or top of the 8th. They were losing and they're winning. And the next day, they had a big lead. They ended up losing 10-9. But I remember that game, watching that one from this bar in Bowling Green next to my hotel. They would have actually been tied for first if they held on to that game. And that's another game where I remember Todd Walker hit a big homer. But at one point, Kent Merker, who would become a little more famous later in the year, couldn't fucking get the outs or whatever that he needed to get. And then he was bitching about the umpire. Yeah, the Cubs scored 6 runs in the 6th. They had at one point they had a 9-5 lead, and they frittered it away. And all I remember watching on TV being furious. This before Steve Stone, like there's something about Merker. Like he pitched like shit, and then he just couldn't get off the field bitching to the umpire after he was pulled out. It was just like that was just so symptomatic of that team. It was like they just got so unhinged so quickly. They pissed the game away there because they just weren't I think Farnsworth was shit in that game, pissing that game away too. That's the point where the Cardinals really passed them. And I distinctly remember watching. And then the next day, Ray Ordonez made like 4 errors in the first inning, and then he was crying in the clubhouse after the game because he felt so bad.
Mm-hmm.
That series right
Ray
there,
Ordonez,
that's when the Cubs
the
should have
guy
fucking taken it. But they were too distracted with everything else. They, like Aramis pulls the game out the night before. They should have swept that series. I'm not saying it's a different story, but that wasn't meant to be. But very frustrating. That's the pain point. And then from there, Cardinals absolutely just blew by him.
Not to be all Bob Hartley here, but was Bob Hartley also like a hockey coach?
You're talking about the Chicago psychiatrist that lived in Edgewater and took a very circuitous route to work?
Find a couch, lay down. I'm going to... So Dusty, in 2002, famously, his team chokes away the World Series, in part to him jinxing them forever by giving Russ Ortiz the ball when he left. So they blow games 6 and 7 in that series and lose the World Series to the Angels. 2003, he's going to get the Cubs the World Series. It's going to be
redemption.
Famous. My name's Dusty, not Messiah. He basically would have been the Messiah had they closed out that game. Couldn't do it. They lose again the next day. He shows up in 2004, and Dusty and he turned back into it later in his career. He was Mr. Cool, but he had some red ass to him that year. And we talked about this, how the 04 season started so weird. Like, fans were so overamped for April.
The opening weekend against the Reds, yeah.
And I feel like they had this the whole team had this weird, they played the whole season on this knife's edge. And they fell off it a lot. And that's when Mr. Cool Dusty is supposed to take his veteran team and crack their heads together and go, look, this is a long season. All we have to do is get in the playoffs. We learned that last year. We lost the wild card team who went on to win the World Series. We got a good team. Calm down. Knock this shit up. He didn't do it. It was the opposite. They just kept amping it up. And in retrospect, we should have known the balloon was filling up to the point where it was going to pop. And fucking Ryan Dempster popped it for us. Of course he did.
Oh, he helped. Yeah, if he didn't exist, they might have overcome all of that misguided angst and whatever. But as it was, they had no margin for error for that.
Matt Cartchell wouldn't have walked those 3 Mets. Should have kept him.
Two.
Andy Pratt might have.
Yeah,
Andy Pratt would. Andy would at least hit one of them.
That's an 04 reference. Andy Pratt made his debut in April and then was never seen from again.
Right.
Well, that was, and a lot of it fell to Henry not being able to fix the bullpen again.
Yes.
And he felt like he did, right? So he goes out, he gets the best setup man.
Hawkins. We didn't mention Hawkins. Actually, that was a plus.
Right.
That was a plus addition on paper.
And so he's got LaTroy setting up for Sweaty Joe. And they got the 8th and the 9th all set up, except for the fact that we should have all seen coming. Sweaty Joe had left his arm in a heap on the mound.
It was on borrowed time.
Mm-hmm.
Still.
Although we looked Hawkins, right, Joe would have another great season.
Later with Cleveland, he led the league in saves.
Yes, we actually unearthed that on an episode, which I had forgotten. He had a couple 40-plus saves even. So, but just like John Lieber came back to be like a 16-game winner for the Yankees, but it just takes a while. At that point, Joe wasn't helping us in 04. And, LaTroy had been a closer, so they kind of hedged their bets a little bit because he wasn't officially the closer, but kind of got closer money. And then when he was thrust into the role, he struggled. But again,
they should have seen it coming because the reason that the Twins were cheap even then, but the reason they were cool with letting him go was they didn't want to pay him to be a closer because they didn't think he could be a closer. And the Cubs weren't going to make him the closer. They were like, okay, this is fine. We don't need to do this. And then, of course, they ended up making him the closer.
Coincidentally,
Joe wasn't nearly as bad as I thought in 04. I mean, he was his ERA was 8.02.
He just got hurt.
That's not that bad, is it? 8? Is 8?
And how many home runs did he give up to Rob McCoyak on Memorial Day weekend?
Oh God, yeah.
Remember that, Mike?
Yeah.
How many kids did Rob's wife have? She just kept
as a kid,
babies out, and he kept hitting home runs.
At the time, I was about 10 years old, and I was actually living on the south side of Chicago. And a lot of my friends actually knew Rob McCoviak because he is from, I think, Oak Lawn.
He went to Providence, I think. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I had all these freaking Southside Irish mouth breathers just rubbing in my face that this South suburban guy just beat the Cubs.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was terrible.
Yeah.
I will say one other. You go ahead, Huey.
No, go ahead.
He didn't give up those home runs to Rob McCoyak. That was LaTroy.
Was it? It was LaTroy. Oh, my bad.
I think Sweaty Joe was already hurt. He didn't pitch after June 4th.
Okay. Well, but that was Memorial Day weekend. Mike, what were you going to say?
I was going to bring up that one thing down the stretch that is kind of very comparable with 2023 to 2014. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Andy.
Go ahead. I just thought I'm looking. I think he did give up one of the home runs to McCoyak.
Yeah, I thought
in his last.
I gotcha.
He pitched that game and then he left his next one early and was never a Cub.
Yeah, he was done. Literally the end.
Yep.
Down the stretch in 23, and in common with 04, you saw a lot of unearned playing time being given to bums. You had a lot of at-bats being taken by Jose Macias and Calvin Murray and Navy Perez. And, with the 2023 Cubs, you had Patrick Wisdom starting a lot of games that he shouldn't have.
Well,
and Pete Crow Armstrong getting all the playing time while Canario was riding the bench and struggling mightily.
Good call.
So that's one
and
big
he even
connection
said
I
the
found.
same fucking thing. Dusty, kind of the same thing. Dusty was, I got to stick with my guys, his guys.
Yeah.
Ross said, I got to play the guys who got us here. And my thing was always, where are you? You're nowhere. You're in the third wild card spot. And you haven't won anything. You haven't gotten anywhere yet.
Right.
You got to play the guys that are going to help you win.
The ultimate irony is that David Ross and Dusty Baker loathe each other.
Yes,
yeah.
Very good. That's one of the few redeeming qualities of David Ross.
So
he knew
far,
enough to hate Dusty. So far, I'm going to solve the Rob Makoviak thing. He got both of them. He hit a walk-off against Joe in the first game of the doubleheader, and he hit a 2-run homer in the bottom of the ninth to tie the game against LaTroy. And then they went on, and Craig Wilson hit a home run off Francis Beltran.
Okay.
In the 10th.
So, I misremembered that. Thanks for clarifying. And am I the only one that immediately thought of huge buck fucking teeth when you mentioned Jack Wilson?
It was
I
Craig
could
Wilson.
Craig. I'm sorry. Who did I? Oh, Craig Wilson was the blonde-haired guy.
Yep.
I'm thinking of
they
Jack
had
Wilson.
multiple Wilsons.
Jack Wilson's who I'm thinking
Jack's
of, right?
kid is like a hotshot prospect, right? Never strikes out.
Does he have huge teeth too, like Freddie Bynum?
He needs a dental plan. He came to major. He signed with a team just to get the dental plan.
So long dental plan.
Jacob Wilson. He was the 10th. He went 6th overall in the draft last year to.
Okay.
I don't know what.
And that's
the A's. So he's not even really on a big league team. He's on the A's.
Oh boy, Las Vegas, and that's Jack Wilson's kid. But it was Craig Wilson, the blonde-haired dude, who hit that homer.
The bigger.
To sweep the doubleheader. Okay, fair enough. As far as I would say, we've only discussed 2 of these seasons. The one that's most comparable to 2023 would have to be 04 because it's like a kind of a late season collapse when you kind of had it in your hand.
They're not playing for the division; they're playing for the wild card, in both
Right,
instances. Their manager is actively sabotaging the team by not playing the right players.
And then as far as which one is worse between that and 01, I think you got to say 04 just because it was so prosaic. Yeah. Because they were such a good team. The fact that they were underachieving and weren't really is irrelevant. They were a loaded team that was in contention to just make the turn, like you kept saying, Andy. So, they were not. The other team was overachieving. This team was greatly underachieving. So, collapse.
I went through the 01 team and we made fun of their players. And then 04, you've got Derek Lee and Ramos Ramirez, and eventually you get Nomar, and you have Moises Alou, and you have Sammy, and then you have
Todd Walker,
you have
Mark Grudzielanek.
You have Kerry Wood, Mark Pryor, Greg Maddux, Carlos Zambrano.
Yeah.
It was until the 2016 Cubs, maybe the 15 Cubs.
Yeah.
It was the most talented team of our lifetime.
Yep.
And it didn't win shit.
Oh man, I will say it would have come all the full comparison would have been great if maybe Marcus Stroman would have pulled the Kent Merker move with Steve Stone going up to the booth and
we started to hate the whole team.
Chewing him out for criticism.
Yeah. I guess
to do so.
That's a good point. I don't think hateability is a factor in assessing the worst collapse, but there's no comparison there. That 04 team is,
Well, and so I kind of flippantly compared Seiya losing the ball in the lights to Dempster. But the reality of it was, the Dempster one was so much worse. Because Seiya did that in the 8th inning of a game against the best team in the National League. Where you just felt like watching the game. If the Cubs didn't add on, they were going to lose anyway.
That's what I felt. That's what I felt.
The Cubs did that, and the 04 Cubs did it to the worst team in the National League.
Yep.
They gave up hits to guys who never played in the big leagues again.
No, walks, worse.
Well, I know,
worse.
but then Victor Cruz, and I remember who the little asshole was who hit the game winner finally.
It was
Craig Brazell.
Yes, thank you, Mike.
Greg
See,
Brazell, yep.
I knew it was good to have him on. The two, by the way, Dempster with a 3-run lead in the bottom of the ninth after getting the first out. I'll never forget the two names of the journeymen that were out of baseball within a year that he walked. It was Eric Valent and J.R. Phillips, both of whom were out of baseball in 2 years. He walked them with nobody on base in a 3-run lead,
and
then they had to bring LaTroy in.
We did the math to kind of take some of the stigma off of LaTroy. Just how many games he had pitched. Like he was supposed to just have that day off because he had pitched so much.
Exactly.
And then he couldn't give it to him and that was the thing though. You just need somebody who's going to throw a strike, basically.
Put the ball in
It
play.
didn't have to be LaTroy. Like there had to be somebody down there, right?
Well, true.
Although I guess there really wasn't when you looked at their...
Dusty would have been really raked over though if he pulled, because Dempster was a pretty smart acquisition by Henry. He was signed as a reclamation project, and then we're gonna maybe make you our closer for next year, but now we're gonna put you. He was being put into situations for the previous couple weeks, and he was somewhat effective. And they because they just knew they couldn't really trust LaTroy and Borowski was out. They were grooming Dempster to be the closer.
He was signed with the idea that he was going to pitch in 2004, and he got rehabbed enough that he showed up at the end of 2004, or he was going to pitch in 2005, and he was
as a reliever
in 2004.
He had been a starter his whole life until then.
Yeah, and he came back on August 1st.
Okay, yeah, so he was pitching for a bit. It was a great signing, and it actually was. Much of it was a great, it did, because of that, Henry would try to repeat that, doing the same thing with Scott Williamson a couple years later. But that was a shrewd move. It was just that motherfucker couldn't throw the ball over the plate when he really needed to, and really had a cascading effect on a lot of people's lives. Because you know what, LaTroy, I know we've won a World Series, but I don't think LaTroy Hawkins would be very popular in the field. Yeah, that motherfucking clown could walk in on a unison or ride in on a unicycle, and everyone's going to cheer him. So,
of course,
yeah. Sorry, I got wound up.
This is the final.
Dempster walked 13 guys and hit 2 in 20 innings that year. So him coming in and walking people should not have been a shock, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. This is going to be the final Dusty team we talk about with a regular season collapse. One guy who did not collapse down the stretch was Carlos Zambrano in September. Correct. He was excellent for them. And one thing I think we kind of underappreciate when it comes to Zambrano is that, he still wound up having this long-ish, very solid career in the midst of Pryor and Wood's careers crumbling to the ground largely because of Dusty. And, Zambrano during the Dusty years, I have it here, he averaged 32 starts per year, 215 innings pitched every year. And somehow, he held up very well, even after that.
Yeah.
This is Carlos from September 6th, which is his first start in September, to the end of the season. He pitched in 6 games. He was 5-1. No, the Cubs were 5-1. He was 4-0. He pitched 41 innings. He had an ERA of 1.96. He only struck out 33. Man. He walked 12, and he only gave up 36 hits in 41 innings. The other guy who pitched really well until his second to last start was Maddox. So those two were the guys trying to hold it together at the end, with the old guy and the young guy, and then your two studs in the middle were more erratic.
Except, didn't Pryor have a 17 strikeout game?
Yes.
After the Mets series
he pitched amazing
against the Reds.
His final start of the season,
or against the Braves.
That was the one. That was
Reds. It was the Reds. That was the Austin Kearns. Yeah.
Because the Cubs couldn't fucking score.
Well, because after Dempster set up LaTroy then from that point just then blew every game. He after the Victor Diaz game, he blew 2 of the Reds games after that. So I'm not letting him off the hook. But
let's see. So coming down oh shit, it didn't do it.
It is so like the 23 team without the acerbic personalities.
Yeah, on that final homestand. So let's see. Starting on the last, they had a long road trip. They had 4 in Cincinnati. They had a makeup doubleheader against the Marlins because of another fucking hurricane.
Right.
Were those games
I forgot
at
about
Wrigley?
that. I think so.
Wasn't there some like double header where Pryor started and then Clement started?
There was at least one game at Wrigley where the Marlins were the home team, and then one of those games, the Troy Hawkins finished it with an immaculate inning. It's the first time I've ever seen that. He finished the game with a 9-pitch strikeout in the 9th inning. So yeah, LaTroy was gassing it until he was overused. I feel like.
And that was part of their complaint. They already had this long road trip from they were going to be on the road from the 16th through the 26th, and they had 4 in Cincinnati. Then they had their 1 day off. Then they had 3 in Pittsburgh and 3 in New York. And then on that 1 day off, they ended up having to fly to Florida and play a doubleheader. So they ended up having to play 12 games or 11 games in 10 days. But they were fine. They won 3 out of 4 in Cincinnati. They split the doubleheader against the Marlins, and then they swept the Pirates. So now all they had left were the 3 games against the Mets. And they won the first game. So you're like, oh, this is great.
Mm-hmm.
So you're feeling pretty good about it. Then they had the Saturday night game. They lost on a horrible check swing. Like Moises is up with a chance to tie the game. And they rung him up on a check swing that wasn't a strike. They lose that game. The next day, they have the awful, I got these backwards. Saturday was the day, the Victor Diaz game. The next day, they have a chance to win, and that's the one with Moises' check swing. But then they come home, and they play the Reds, and they beat the shit out of them. They beat them 12-5 in the first game, and you're like, all right, we're fine. And then they wouldn't win again until the last day of the season when they were already eliminated. They lost 8-3, 4-3, 2-1, which is the prior game. And then they lost to the Braves 5-4 and 8-6.
So your mention of that compressed schedule suddenly reminded me of the 2019 collapse, which we're going to get to.
We'll get to that.
With that whole thing that culminated in Pedro Strop having to beat out a grounder at first. Like wasn't that the end of a long
that was 2018
okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember.
We should probably get moving
that now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
All right, so we already voted, right? We decided that 04 is worse than...
Yes, 04 definitely worse.
And the most like 20. Well, 04 is worse than 01, so far it's the leader of the clubhouse. And it's also the most similar to 23 right now.
So then our next season is one that I don't think we're all a little like, well, yeah, I guess it kind of qualifies. But how much does it? That's the 09 Cubs. They would finish 83-78. It was their 3rd winning season in a row under Lou Piniella, which was like the first time anybody had winning seasons 3 years in a row for the Cubs since Leo DeRocher.
And basically our lifetime, yep.
And they were in it. This is a season that it's easy to forget how long they were actually in the race. Like they were in it longer than we thought. They finished. They finished in second place that year at 83-78, but they finished 7.5 games out.
Wow. Okay.
And that was, I can find it very quickly because it sticks out like a sore thumb right here. They were a half game out of first on the 2nd of August.
Okay.
And they are in beautiful Florida again.
God.
And
it's the Cody Ross game.
Yes. And guess who's pitching? Guess who the starting pitcher for the Cubs was?
Ryan Dempster. Was it our favorite Canadian? Yes.
Ryan Dempster against former Cub farmhand Ricky Nolasco.
Part of what trade? The Sergio Mitre, Reynel Pinto, and Ricky Nolasco trade
for Juan Pierre.
Yeah, we don't talk about Juan Pierre or
Sergio Mitre.
Or Sergio Mitre, yeah.
No. Don't even like to think about it. Okay.
So Dempster pitched 6 shutout innings. And Aaron Heilman, the Marlins finally get across. They get one off the great Aaron Heilman, who was mostly known for
also
being tall.
Former future Cub, right?
No, he was.
He was a Cub at the time.
Oh, on the Cubs here. I'm sorry, I wasn't following.
Because Nolasco only gave up 1 run through 7, so we're tied after 7. And Angel Guzman pitches into the 8th. No, he pitches I guess he just pitches the 8th. Steve Stone claimed Angel Guzman was going to be the greatest Cub pitcher he'd ever seen. He might have been right, considering he was always hurt.
Had a pretty good year in 2009, if I remember right.
And Steve Stone now broadcasting White Sox games in 2009. That's how long Angel Guzman has suddenly been around.
So top of the ninth, game tied at 1. Former Angels World Series hero Brendan Donnelly pitching for the Marlins, and the great Jake Fox comes to the plate.
Because Ramos was out. He was on the shelf.
He homers on the first pitch to give the Cubs a 2-1 lead. He would then be followed by Milton Bradley.
Yeah,
Milton goes away, but it's later. Milton Bradley flies out. Soriano strikes out. Mike Fontenot walks, and Coy Hill strikes out. But we're off to the ninth.
Hill, no.
We're off to the ninth. At the Cubs up 2-1, going to be in a flat-footed tie for first place. Hot damn.
On August 2nd.
Kevin Gregg comes in to pitch for the Cubs, and he's got to face the great Hanley Ramirez.
Ooh.
Gets him to pop out. No problem.
Okay.
Right shape. All you got to do is you got to get Dan Uggla and Cody Ross out.
Midget arms.
On the fifth pitch of his at-bat against Dan Uggla ties the game with a home run to deep left field. And before the all 9 Marlins fans can take their seats, Cody Ross has homered on the very next pitch, and the Cubs have lost, and the season was over, and we didn't even know it.
Okay, I'll buy it. Yeah. That's a collapse. A half game up, and when they hold on there in August, you're not a real, pretender. I wish I could remember that Jake Fox but honest to God, I cannot. God
they
damn.
Actually won. They won the next 2 days, and got to a tied for first.
Okay.
So you can't blame us on Kevin Gregg. And then
was one of those
then they lost.
Alfonso Soriano walk-off grand slam against the Astros?
There's a walk-off where they won 3-2 on the Friday. So
it wouldn't be a grand slam.
Yeah.
Nope. But
I remember there was like a game that went like very long in extra innings that they won on a Soriano grand slam.
Well, I might have had the wrong date there because you're going to the.
After they won those 2 games in a row, then they would lose 8 of their next 9. Then they would win twice, and then a walk-off loss, another walk-off by Gregg. Let's see, what did he do this time to the Padres?
Is that in San Diego? Yes, I remember this one.
Oh, this is a great one. So
this is another one.
Yeah, the Cubs are up 1-0 in the ninth.
Yep.
I don't remember this one. This is great. Cubs are up 1-0 in the ninth, and Carlos Marmol got them out of a jam in the 8th. But Lou goes to his closer in the 9th. He goes to Gregg. Because remember, they had gotten Gregg because Carlos had gotten a little inconsistent.
Well, they also had to replace Kerry Wood, who was closing in 2008, who had left for Cleveland.
Oh, that's right. That's right. They had to sell him. They just let him go
I believe Marmol had started going wild, or rather, hitters started laying off his crazy shit. Right?
Right, but no problem. Cubs have a 1-0 lead. How'd they get the 1-0 lead? Who was the hero? Aramis had driven in Derek Lee with nobody out in the 8th off of Mike Adams.
God bless you, Aramis Ramirez.
So the Cubs are up 1-0, and Kevin Gregg has to face Everest Cabrera, gets him to ground out to second base. Then David Eckstein comes up. He walks him.
Oh, my God.
Adrian Gonzalez comes up. He hits a fly ball, but he's out. So there's 2 outs. Everything's good. Chase Headley doubles to score Eckstein to tie the game. They walk the great Kevin Kuzmanoff intentionally.
That's who I thought walked it off.
And that's Kyle Blanks. Remember him? Big number 88, I think.
I do.
Kyle Blanks.
Yes.
I feel like a big guy that didn't look like he should be a tight end, not a baseball player.
Get a
right?
3-run homer.
Yeah.
And the Cubs lost 4-1.
Yeah, that's worse than I remember. And I'm going to just confess why. because I'm on record as saying that after 08, my brain was kind of broken and I was checked out until Theo was hired. So absolutely revisiting this trauma with you fine folks. There's no doubt that that's a bit of a collapse because in the wild card era, you know.
Yeah, they'd gone in 4 games behind the Rockies in the wild card, but they also had the Giants, Marlins, and Braves were between them and the Rockies. So they were.
Forgot that the Rockies were good then.
They were 2 years removed from their only World Series, I guess. Remember, they got swept. They swept the team that swept the Cubs before they got swept by the Red Sox in 07. Diamondbacks. That's their only World Series. But, yeah, so they Tulowitzki. But, yeah. 1656, though. I'm having a tough time with that record on August 17th. But in the wild card era, again, that's the qualification. Get into the tournament, right?
Yeah. Well, they were
even with Kevin Gregg.
Who won the 09 had to be the Cardinals.
That's the Giants first, right? Against the Rangers?
No, that was Yankees over the Phillies.
Yes. Good call, Mike. That was 2 years off.
That was Phillies winning their second consecutive.
The Phillies kind of came out of nowhere the year before and jumped ahead of the Cubs, it felt like. And they won it all. Mm-hmm. And then Joe Girardi's only world championship was this year in 09.
So the Cardinals won the division with 91 wins. The Cubs were second with 83. They're the only 2 teams in the Central with a winning record.
Wow.
The Cubs, 83 wins. They would have finished 4th in the West and 4th in the East. The Cardinals would have finished 3rd in the West and 2nd in the East.
I would say a team that won 98 games the year before couldn't flag down a 89 win Cardinal team the next year.
91.
I mean, 91 after being in contention and still being there, sure. But certainly nothing like 2023 and not nearly the worst of the 3 that we've covered. So I think we gave it its due.
Barely qualifies.
That's fine. I'm cool with it qualifying. It is.
Yeah.
That team should have, a few breaks they could get in.
It's one that feels almost kind of the opposite of 04 in that in 04 they kind of shored up all the holes they had from the 03 team minus, really shoring up the bullpen. But they kind of half-assed it with relying on Mike Fontenot as a reliable replacement for Mark DeRosa. And we had this standing ovation the entire weekend long for Mark DeRosa when Cleveland came to town. That notwithstanding,
if anything, it feels
probably
like it feels like an 0-1 team.
Well, it
the
never
team
made
that
any
they slapped together.
It never made any sense to me. So the 08 team was fueled by Sam Zell wanting Hendry and wanting John McDonough mostly to pump up the roster. The 07 and 08 Cubs were fueled by, hey, I'm selling this team, so just make them good. And I don't give a shit. I'm going to be around to pay the contracts. And then in 09, the
McDonough was
family
gone.
that owns the Cubs now, they didn't get him till late in the season. So why did in the offseason between 08 and 09 did they have to get rid of? Did they not keep Carey? Because that wasn't a baseball decision. They just didn't want to pay him.
I think
it turned out
McDonough had left. Not that he wasn't much more than a figurehead, but I'm pretty sure McDonough had left for the Hawks after 08.
Yeah. Could be.
But
and who knows? Maybe he was the one that was, really influencing Sam Zell to, go as hard as he did.
Pump up the team. I mean, yeah. They spent on that 08 team. We talked about it. What they tried is a team that collapsed in the playoffs, so they tried to address what went wrong, like Andy said in the past.
Yeah, Lou
so they got rid of DeRosa for Milton Bradley,
right.
and
Lou
Bradley was a goddamn disaster.
That wasn't Kosuke. And they got Milton. Jesus.
And Milton, he really was a cancer. He was just all year long. He's just
let's see.
And in spite of him,
Milton got released in St. Louis, probably on this Friday. This 18th,
I remember
the 18th of September.
In his last game as a Cub, in his first plate appearance, he got a single, and then just checked himself out of the game. Lou didn't call him out of the game. He just ran off of first base and everyone was confused as to what was happening. He just kind of quit.
He and Lou also had the shouting match in the Comiskey dugout in the Friday game that year, and then of course most famously he tried to cure his image by being fan friendly and then tossed the ball into the stands when there were only 2 outs at Wrigley.
It's the Twins, God.
Yeah, his last game was the 17th of September against the Brewers at Wrigley. He left in the 6th inning. He singled, and Bobby Scales pinch ran for him.
Bobby Scales.
And so then they get to St. Louis for the next day for the Friday first game of a 3-game series, and Jim Hendry called a team meeting, and he announced to the team that Milton had not come to St. Louis because he was no longer a Cub, and the players applauded.
As they should have.
Yeah, and then that pretty much the whole thing ended up in a trash heap. That whole whatever they had there, we would talk about not having any kind of a run up, randomly winning it. That this 03, 04 should have been one. Let's start over. I mean, Henry was working it. He did have, and he had some resources. This was supposed to be a little bit of a run up. 07 under, overachieved, sneak in. 08 really good, and then choke. 09, and then by then it's like, all right, we're selling this team and we're gonna tear it all down. So, bye, Jim.
Yeah.
I do have a fonder recollection of Jim Hendry now than I would say that I did 10 years ago.
I do as well. I mean, there were guys that he drafted and acquired that wound up on the 2016 team.
He's kind of like, now that I think he's kind of like a Jerry Angelo. Like, it's a low bar. We don't have a lot of great GMs. But, geez, when you size it up, he really was better than most of these assholes.
Yes.
So,
I would say if you look at it's in recent vintage, the best trades the Cubs have made. Obviously, you're never going to top the Jake Arrieta, Pedro Strop trade. But Hendry, most of the other ones are his. He gets Derek Lee for nothing. He gets Aramis for nothing.
For nothing.
I mean,
he had a lot of trades where he traded away complete dead weight for really useful pieces, like the Mark Grudzelanek Eric Karros trade for Todd Hundley, or acquiring Damian Miller. I think they traded away a guy who never even made it to the big leagues for him. He had a lot of really good trades in which useful pieces were acquired and not a lot going back.
So the ironic thing that Hendry's failing was that the farm system didn't consistently produce, and he had been the farm director before he was the GM.
he was a better general manager than he was a farm director.
Yeah, I mean, things like his number 1 picks 2 years in a row were from his old high school. Ryan Harvey and Brian Dupiric. Because he knew the coach.
Brian Dupiric.
He was he would have loved. Wasn't it the new Craig Counsell's old bench coach Pat Murphy? Wasn't he the coach at Notre Dame, and he was buddies with Hendry, and that's why they got Pierce Johnson and Jeff Samardzija, and because he would call his buddy and he'd be like, "Yeah, these guys are good." It's like, okay, Jim, that's fine, but they can't be your only reason for drafting guys. Although he'll tell you, Pierce is still pitching. So how bad a pick
he is
with his horribly painful name.
Right. It's a sentence, and it's a very painful sentence.
Nickname him Prince Albert.
And then, of course, the 2010 Cubs, Lou gets tired of watching it in end of July.
He had to float in a pool.
It's funny. I don't know if you guys remember this. So in 2010, they get this surprise press conference, and it's Lou announcing that he was retiring. He's going to go home. Mom wasn't feeling well. He's going to go back home to Tampa and take care of Mom, which I think was news to his mom. He was like, wait a minute, I'm fine. What? She's like, shut up, Mom. You're sick.
She's still alive today.
The guest bedroom.
I don't know if you remember, but in 2007, he'd only been on the job for a couple of months, and there was this breaking news. The Cub had this big announcement to make. And everybody thought it was going to be the rumor going around, the score and the broadcast was Lou was quitting. Lou does, fuck this, he doesn't want to do this. This was his first season where they didn't go into the playoffs.
His first 2 months before.
And you remember what the actual announcement was? It was so weird.
What?
The announcement was that Ryan Dempster was going to transition from closer to starter, but he didn't do it until the next season.
Wow, I don't
Like
remember any of that.
him and Lou had talked about it because Lou's like, I think he'd be a better starter. He used to be a starter. I think he'd be a better starter than you were a closer. And they were
Yeah.
going to do it. And apparently they had decided they were going to do it, and then they couldn't figure out who was going to close. So they ended up. They must not have trusted Marmol yet. So they ended up not doing it. But then we all knew
Yeah,
that
they
they
had
were going to stretch him out for 08, and they
interesting.
did.
Interesting. 'Cause they had Bob Howery, never really a full-time closer. We're talking like 07.
It's Stevie Iyer.
Oh God. I was beginning at Carlos Marmol.
Ascension,
Yeah.
right? Marmol was pretty awesome beginning in 07.
Yeah.
You
Kind of
had,
petered out around.
who's,
I feel
who's
like
the
it
guy who
petered out
jumped
around
in the dumpster from the A's?
Chad Godin.
Godin.
God, I say
Chad,
Godin.
Chad Godin, not Brendan Godin, the Big Ten announcer.
Yeah.
Chad Godin. Yeah, and he was pitching. He pitched well for them until
He was, I know.
fell
He was
into
part of
the
the Harden trade, Josh Donaldson trade.
Oh, that's right. And that was the Cubs' answer to CC Sabathia to the Brewers.
Well, Harden was great, but he was always at like 140 pitches after 4 innings.
Yeah, and he was always hurt. Kind of the opposite of. It's funny because I always felt like the CC the weight and so Ned and then Dale, because remember Ned didn't finish that season.
Ned Yost, yep.
Yeah.
That was kind of the CC. That was the blueprint for how Joe used Aroldis. And that was, we've only got this guy for the rest of the season. We're just going to pitch his ass off.
Yeah.
We don't care if he gets hurt. He's on
3 days
else's
rest.
dime
3 days
next year.
rest. 3 days
CC
rest.
was pitching on 3 days rest and coming out of the pen late in the season and pitched. He didn't get to go on a long playoff run because they crapped out in the first round just like the Cubs did.
Right.
They lost to the Phillies.
Had a big game in that like final regular season series against the Cubs, if I remember right.
Yeah, they clinched against the Cubs, right?
DC?
Yes.
The wild card, which they still have a banner flying in Milwaukee for that. Right up there next to their one pennant and their National League runner-up banner. It's like Craig Counsell.
Pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right next to the Hank Aaron retired number for spending 2 years there.
That's right. Yeah, they've retired Bob Euchre's microphone and Hank Aaron.
It's cute. It's only 90 miles away if you want to go check it out.
Isn't Hank's pennant is a different color though, right? Like it's yellow, so it stands out because it's kind of like, yeah, he was here, but he wasn't really here. But he played in this town a lot, just barely for us.
Yeah, he did hit some homers. I recently saw some YouTube footage on Hank Aaron, pot-bellied Hank Aaron hitting some bombs at County Stadium.
Was there any footage on that reel of Ernie Banks hitting a home run other than his 500th?
The only highlight you ever see.
No, because I was watching Marquee.
They're like, it's the only one we own the rights to. You own the team.
How is that possible? Well, apparently Pat Brickhouse's estate finagled it, so you got to talk to their attorney.
Oh, God. All right, so Mike, I can't be. I got to be more specific. So Mike,
Huey.
So did your dad obviously listen to Brickhouse?
Yeah, we hated him.
I was going to ask. He seems when you hear highlights, it seems like it would be so
weird
to listen to that guy.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he tried his best because they were mostly horrible teams, right? And then the DeRocher thing came up. So, yeah, I don't know. They weren't planting a flag on it, but they didn't really care for him when he left. They weren't upset, and I think would go so far as to whee.
It helped that they replaced him with someone better, though.
Well, I remember because I talked to him before. I didn't even know about the White Sox till I stumbled across Channel 44 one time in 1980. But I remember once I found out, and I told the story before, I can't really root for them. But my older brother, was once throwing me pitches in the backyard, and I knew who Jack Brickhouse was. And I was already following the Cubs, and he throws one, and I miss it. He's like, big swing and a miss. And he's like, well, but who's that? Harry Caray. Who's that? He's the White Sox announcer. I'm like, really? Who's they have a guy? He's not Jack Brickhouse. That sounds pretty funny. That sort of colorful, big swing and a miss. So even then, we kind of knew that. I think at least my brothers did. the guy the Sox got, he's a lot more fun. Like he and an absolutely bipolar Jimmy Pearsall, just like letting it rip, goofing on, whatever. And then we've got just the more, just I don't know, not popular. Short answer, Brickhouse. In spite of his, prestige, he'd been there forever. So
yeah, and he got to do everything. He did the Bears, and he did the Cubs,
1963.
He did some White
Irv
Sox
Cups
games, and he did
Bulls.
He hosted
I'd probably
the freaking Democratic National Convention one year, and I mean,
yeah. I mean, he's almost more belongs to WGN more than the Cubs, except for the fact that he just ended up doing the Cubs for so long. So,
is his bust still on Michigan Avenue in front of the?
I believe it is.
Yep.
I believe
Does
it
it
is.
still does it still get loose, and they have to go tighten it back down because the rumbling of the cars near it apparently loosens it, and they're worried it'll tip over and break someday. Yeah, my family's one story about Jack Brickhouse was my aunt who lived in Skokie. Came over for Christmas or Thanksgiving one year and said, "Oh," she was telling my dad. This was probably either before me or when I was a little kid. Her husband was my Uncle Andy, who I'm named after, and she's like, "Andy and I were at a party and we met that Jack Brickhouse." And Dad's like, "Oh, well, how was he?" "I don't know. He had a big boil on his neck." That's all we ever remembered about the Jack Brickhouse story was he had a big boil on his neck. I don't know. He had a big boil on his neck.
Mine was working with a guy who was older than me, but when he was younger in the 70s, was a caddy and asked for an autograph, and supposedly Brickhouse told him to fuck off.
I kind
Which
of
is
like
fine,
that.
That sounds appropriate.
Seek autographs, I don't really have a lot of sympathy for, but anyway.
Yeah, it's almost as good as me and Bill Melton.
Yes, you don't want an autograph.
Yeah. Would you like an autograph? No, thanks. I'm fine.
That hurts.
Screw you. I could give a shit. I don't even know. Honestly, I didn't know who Bill Melton was. My friend Neil's telling me he played at the same time Sano did. I don't know who that is. I don't give a shit. He seems like a prick. Actually, I did know who he was by then because he was doing Sox post game.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't know. Otherwise, I wouldn't know who it was. All right, so now we're off to the last year on this episode.
Well, did we make a determination on 09?
Yeah. So
yeah,
I think
23 is worse.
No, but right. Okay. And we had a discussion about 18, but they're disqualified because they made the playoffs. But because of how easily they could have been the second seed, it could almost. But we probably don't have time to go to 18. Screw that. They made the playoffs technically. So
yeah. Well, and
you know
it's weird. They're kind of. It's almost like they're of a piece. Like I will tell you. I remember. I conflate memories from the 2 years.
Okay.
But yeah, 18.
Easy to do
and the
that.
other thing about 18. So let's talk a little bit about 18. So we can get back to the thing fellas used to always talk about because we were doing that in real time. We talk about them being like chokers and all that stuff. The fact of the matter was their record wasn't that bad down the stretch. Just the Brewers wouldn't.
In 18. Right.
What was frustrating was they weren't scoring. Like they were getting good pitching and they weren't scoring.
Mm-hmm.
That was Theo's "the offense broke" thing, and they didn't do anything to fix it. And they had to play the extra game. They had to play the game 163, and had they won it, they would have had home field advantage through the entire National League playoffs.
But it shouldn't have come down to that.
No, it shouldn't have.
Nope.
And they did make the playoffs, and then, of course, it's the same thing happened. They couldn't score against the Brewers, and then they played the awful Rockies and the great Kyle Freeland, and they couldn't score. And future Cub Tony Wolters, the worst hitter in the National League that year, is the guy who drove in the run.
And then, of course, Terrence Gore swung.
Yes,
I was at that game. Very painful. I will say that, there's another component here when we have Frank on to, compare, certain collapses. I'm going to say that 69, the 18 Cubs did not really collapse. The Brewers just were insanely hotter than shit. The 69 Mets were just ridiculous. They could have played better, and there were some games that they blew. But Jesus Christ, Milwaukee could not lose the last 2 weeks. Cubs had no margin for error. But I will point to the game, again, Labor Day, just like Preston Wilson 01.
I was there. I was there for that one.
And this is the game. The Cubs. Let's quickly give some context because this does fuel a collapse because when you end up in a one-game tie and then lose, that means that any one game that you could have had would have flipped the season. And on Labor Day, the Cubs were trailing, and Anthony Rizzo became the first player in baseball history as a left-handed hitter to hit a homer off of Josh Hader. And it was a lead-changing go-ahead homer in the top of the eighth. And Carl Edwards then came in like Ryan Dempster, and like Carl Edwards, frankly, with 2 outs in Game 7 of the 2016 World Series, suddenly couldn't throw a fucking strike.
I can still see him screaming as he's coming off the mound at the umpire.
Fuck him, who cares?
Even though,
he did the same thing
it
the
was
year before.
Nowhere close. Yeah.
He did the same thing actually between Game 7 and 16 in this game, in the playoffs in 2017, even though the Cubs were, pretty much done. In that Dodgers series, there was the game in which he had the bases loaded, 1 out, got a pop out, and then he walked Yu Darvish in the playoffs. All right. Mm-hmm. So there's Game 7 in 2016. We all look past it because we're like, it's okay. Montgomery came and got it. We love Carl. He's going to be our future closer. To walking Darvish in a game they absolutely had to have in the playoffs. To then this game here where Rizzo does something absolutely unexpected, man. When he hit that home run, you were there, Mike. I don't know how well you remember that. I mean, that had to be bonkers. And Edwards
it
couldn't
truly was,
ball on the plate, just like Ryan Dempster. And that's the one game to me. That game ended, by the way, because Chris Bryant made probably an ill-advised decision to try to turn 2.
Not probably. It was.
Yeah.
He tried to turn a double play of Lorenzo Cain and said, just go home, get the out.
Right.
No, Yelich. It was Yelich, right? Either way.
He was the batter at the plate.
Yeah.
Right.
Cain was going to second, and he was
we got Cain.
Well, it was
couldn't turn it.
If I remember right, it was bases loaded, 1 out. Bryant
he stepped on third.
The ball hit to him. He steps on third, tries to get Yelich out at first.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. He just, whatever. Hey, next guy would have probably gotten a hit.
What I remember the next guy was, who was the next guy? Jesus Aguilar.
Jesus Aguilar.
Yeah.
What I remember about that game was our basement had flooded due to heavy rains, and I spent the game down here I had the TV propped up so that none of the stuff would touch the floor while I was shot vacuuming water out of my basement. So I had one eye on the game and one eye on. I kept going back and forth, and did a lot of swearing. Yeah. So here was this is Carl. So Rizzo hits the homer off Hader in the top of the 8th, gives the Cubs the 3-2 lead. Carl comes in, and this is what he does. Curtis Granderson, 3-1 pitch single. Lorenzo Cain, 1-2 pitch single.
Fucking Curtis.
Okay.
Yelich strikes him out. Aguilar strikes him out. Ryan Braun, full count walk. That's the one he claims he got squeezed on. And
well, it shouldn't come down to that.
Mike Moustakas pinch hits for the great and future Cub Hernan Perez. Walks, base loaded.
Okay.
So that ties the game. Cishek comes in and gets Travis Shaw to ground out. The Cubs set their finest up in the top of the 9th. Almora, Bodie, and Caratini. Victor actually got a hit, and Terrence Gore pinch ran for him. Gore stole second, and Zobrist flew out off of future Cub Jeremy Jeffress. And then in the 9th,
future Brewer and Caratini.
Cishek stayed in, and he walked Eric Kratz. Then he hit Orlando Arcia.
Fucking prick.
Then with Granderson up, he threw a pass ball.
Yeah.
Then he struck out Granderson. Then he hit Lorenzo Cain to load the bases. So, yeah, Carl deserves a lot of shit, but Cishek should not be off the hook. He was worse somehow. I mean,
I know, but the game was already tied.
It was tied. It wasn't. They were losing.
I know, but you had the game in hand. You just hit a homer off a Hader, throw the ball over the plate. And yeah, it wasn't like he just completely couldn't throw. Like you said, the first 3 guys he got 2 balls put in play and then 2 strikeouts. But the first ball was a single on a 3-1 pitch. So, and then Moustakas gets a hit.
I'm not letting Carl off, but Cishek walk, hit by pitch, pass ball, hit by pitch,
agree.
And then he gets the ground ball that.
To be fair, I
believe
believe that was the.
But you can
I believe that.
I was going to say, you can kind of see why Bryant didn't throw home. He's like, we got to get out of this right now. We got to get Cishek out of this game. Well, actually, no, Cishek was out of the game because the ground ball was Jesse Chavez. He came in and he got the
little Jesse in his goggles.
So Jesse tried to get him out of it.
and in fairness to Cishek, I believe that was his 123rd appearance that season. So
Well, Joe loved it.
Madden couldn't help himself.
Yeah, he'd only warmed up in
Cishek.
140 games though.
Okay. So
him warming up was a day off.
I would say that's not like any other collapse other than the next season. Because like you say, maybe it's in tandem. It wasn't really a collapse because they made the playoffs and they could have still righted the ship. But had they not squandered the division, they would have had an elevated status in the postseason, and they could have at least gone to the LCS. And but instead,
well, I mean, the other element of it too is you lose Chris Bryant for a large chunk of that year. You lose Darvish for most of that year. Either of those two guys are healthy, you probably win
one game.
at least the one more game. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, that's true. So not an awful collapse. Not really, yeah. And not really a collapse because they made the playoffs, but the next season, though.
Next season, who was supposed to be the closer at the beginning of the year? Do we remember?
Mike? Going in?
Who was supposed to be the closer in 19?
Brandon Morrow?
Ooh, good call.
And his
he was 18, right? Was he still there in 19?
They signed him in 18, and then he came back on like a 1-year like courtesy deal for like allowing like
right, but it never
the Cubs allowing him to rehab on their dime, basically.
But yeah, you're right because Wade was the one guy in 17, right?
Yeah, and then it was Morrow in 18, who was really good until he tried to put his pants on in the closet. Threw out his back, and that was the end of him. Which is why they got Jesse Chavez.
Yes, who was very effective. Down the stretch in 18, we had Chavez, or down or both 18 and 19. We had Chavez all year 19.
He wasn't back in 19.
No, we only had him
19.
In 18.
Remember the only guy they added in the offseason before 19 was
Daniel Descalso.
Or
are we just talking pitchers?
No, I didn't add any. I mean, nobody of note. Right?
Brad Brock. I think I remember.
Yeah, nobody of note is what I said.
Yeah, no, but he was a legit free agent signing, and he was terrible.
I wonder if he was supposed to be the closer.
No, but he was supposed to bolster the bullpen. And
well,
he never
look at this list and tell me who the fuck was supposed to be the closer then. I mean, I guess Strop
or
never officially.
Maybe at that point they were trying to work Carl into it.
You see, the problem. Carl was the long-term plan at one point. Of course, by then he'd squandered all his currency. Should have known better
than that by then.
Yeah.
Well, this gets to a pretty good. This is the reason
going into 18, maybe not.
But this is the reason that the 18-19 is such shit. This is the Cubs in the middle of their championship window, with all of a sudden the owner's telling Theo,
had an established.
You don't have any money. We can't. Yeah. You're just going to have to learn how to win under this budget because you already won your World Series, and we're not going to stretch anymore.
They shut the door after they got the undermarket Darvish deal. That fell into their lap.
But that was the whole thing, right? So Theo literally at the Darvish press conference was bragging about how great it was because they had more money budgeted than they paid you, so they were going to be able to do all this stuff. Yep. And he never got to spend it on anything. So in this year, in 19, we're going to talk about. They end up in mid-season. They get Craig Kimbrell, who no one had signed, and the only reason they got him was because Ben Zobrist's wife left him, and he was so emotionally wrought he left, and they weren't paying him.
Well, the mystery of who started the season as a closer, I'm still not sure of, and it's going to be tough to find because if I remember right, in 2019, didn't they get off to like a 1-6 start or something like that, and like. Whatever wins they had early in the season were pretty much blowouts to the point where you didn't really require a closer. So
they didn't get a save until their 12th game of the season. It was Strop. I guess it had to be Strop because he got the first 3. He got the first 3.
Yeah. You have to find Paul Sullivan's press clippings.
That's like going to LaTroy. To be your closer. I mean, Pedro was one of the best setup men in Cub history, and there was a reason that he wasn't a closer because he wasn't a closer.
Right.
Yeah.
So you you literally went into the season with like, maybe this will work.
Almost like a repeat of LaTroy almost from 04. In that like you had a solid middle reliever / setup guy that you tried to force into a closer because you were too cheap to find an actual closer, and it backfired on you.
Square peg round hole.
Yeah, then they get off to the terrible start. They didn't get to. They started off 1-0. They won the opener in Texas, 12-4.
Yeah, Hap had a huge game. Remember? Didn't he have like 2 homers? That motherfucker.
Probably.
Or did he do that? He did that every opening day.
Yeah, he hit the first pitch
year
of the
before.
entire season for a home run in Florida.
He was like the Corey Patterson of his time. Yeah, I forgot how much they stumbled out of the gate that year. Jesus.
Oh no, this is the year Hap started in the minors.
Oh, who am I thinking? They blew up somehow. Yeah, I don't know why I thought Hap. They absolutely exploded on opening day, and then
Bodie had 2 hits.
Oh, never mind.
Was it the great Matt Caesar? I remember him being in the opening day lineup that year.
Mark Zagunis was the opening.
Or not Matt
fielder.
Caesar.
Yeah.
Mark Zagunis. That's the other guy.
I remember
Schwarber
that.
had to come off the bench because they had a lefty pit going for Texas. Jesus.
Yeah, 12-4.
It was Almora, Bryant, Rizzo, Baez, Contreras, Bodie. Zobrist was the DH because they were in Texas. Hayward and Zagunis. But they won that one. Home runs. Javi had 2. Bryant hit 1.
Yeah.
And then a lot of nothing for a while. Jason Hayward had 2 hits. Good for him.
I think I distinctly remember after watching that game thinking, all right, the offense, well, Hayward, but so the offense as a whole is fixed after all these games last year that
12 runs in the first game.
Got shut out and only scored 1 run or some of them.
This is the first game after the Rockies mouse fart. Right. Okay.
Well, then they scored 6 runs the next day and they lost 8-6. They scored 10 runs on March 31st, the third game of the season, and they lost on a walk-off.
Yes, Mike Montgomery gave up a walk-off home run, if I remember right. I don't remember which Ranger hit it, but I remember it hit off the left field foul pole and landed on the foul side. And that was like the first time I'd ever seen that happen.
Yeah,
it deceived everybody?
Not that one. This was
that's Nomar Mazara.
Nomar Mazara with a
White Sox,
walk-off
great.
wild pitch.
Wild pitch.
Pedro came in to try to keep the game tied, and he didn't.
Not the game. It was a walk-off, though. Walk-off wild pitch. Almost as undignified as a walk-off balk.
Then they went to Atlanta, and they got swept.
Beating him a nice run for Atlanta.
Then they lost 2 out of 3 to the Brewers. But they would eventually right the ship. They had back-to-back walk-off wins against the Marlins in May.
Mike would have been thinking about a bottom of the 8th, lead-changing 3-run homer from Joey Gallo off of Carl Edwards Jr. in the second game of that series. Would he? No. Okay.
Possibly. It was hit to left, so I don't think it would have been.
Oh, Joey hit him everywhere. Well, let's see.
Maybe.
I'll tell you where he hit.
I'm just blacking out again. I would not have guessed that Carl Edwards was still on the Cubs in 2019. Carry on.
Joey Gallo, 3-run homer, left field.
Okay, that must have been it then. Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah, I remember they actually got to May with a pretty respectable record. There was a series against the Cardinals at Wrigley. They swept. I was at the last game of that series. I think the big narrative around that time was, remember Chris Bryant switched bats to like the axe handle bat and was starting to like get his power back a lot more after everyone being in fear of it going away after the shoulder injury the last year.
I do recall the axe handle.
Yeah, they were 14-10 in April, 16-12 in May. Oh, they were at a losing June, 14-15, 12-11 in July, 16-12 in August, and then 11-16 in September.
There was a point in like late May where they went to Houston, lost 2 out of 3, and I remember like every road series they played after that until like late July when they played the Pirates in that like Little League series. Remember they played it at like the Little League World Series site. They didn't win a road series between that Astros series and that.
Yeah.
Well, they followed that Astros series up by getting swept in St. Louis. So that road trip, they were 1-5.
But you're right, Mike. Yeah, from that weekend on, every time you see a road series, 2 out of 3 to Colorado in mid-June, 2 out of 3 to the Dodgers, 3 out of 4, I should say. Now, and then I see 2 out of 3 to the Reds. I'm like, is that weekend where they made a legend out of Aquino? Is that the guy? Probably.
God, that's right. They wouldn't throw him anything but fastballs.
And then
See
they
if he can
lose
hit a
three out of
fastball. I
four.
think he can.
And then they lose 3 out of 4 at Pittsburgh. They actually they stopped that streak where they split a 2-game series at Comiskey in like mid-July, but
okay.
they still hadn't won a road series until now. I'm going into
I was
August.
at the win in
It's
that game.
ridiculous. Not until and then I see Philadelphia in August, and I absolutely know what that last game is when I see a walk-off because I know where I was when I
the
heard
Bryce Harper
Harper,
Grand
a league-changing walk-off grand slam against
off of
that,
Derek Holland.
Derek Holland,
Dutch oven.
just a descendant of Scott Air and all those other
No,
assholes,
actually,
left-handers.
a descendant of Ryan Dempster. Like,
Yeah,
they did the Harry Carey impression together. Oh, it was great.
Yeah.
They had been teammates in Texas when Dempster got traded for Hendricks. And so they were pals.
Yeah.
Oh, he was the fucking worst.
I was on my way to play softball, Mike, for Cody's, and I think I had time and I was hungry, and I actually hit up the White Castle in Addison when I was like listening to that game. And you just knew though that game was like slipping away. Like they were about to lose it, and you're like, well, Harper, he's not going to hit a grand slam to end the game, but he did. But it was like you just knew it was slipping away. But they absolutely needed that game, and Harper. He's had a couple iconic homers against the Cubs. That's one of them, the one in the playoffs, which they still lost when he was with Washington. But yeah, Derek Holland.
Well, let's look.
He had no business being that team. Yeah, that's a ball breaker of a game. Where were the Cubs in the division? They were actually tied for first, right around that time.
Yeah,
it was a watered down division because they were never more than 14 games over 500 in 2019. But
do you remember going into that season? That was a year where like the Reds had a lot of hype around them because they made some offseason moves to acquire, I think, Yasiel Puig and Alex Wood, and
was that Moustakas that year?
Maybe Moustakas too. Like that was the most competitive I remember the NL Central being like going into a season. Obviously, the Reds turned out being as bad as they usually are, but
they kicked the Cubs in the nuts with their new shiny toy Aquino that year.
Yeah, that's true.
But
so this is interesting. This the game against the Phillies that we were just talking about was a Yu Darvish Drew Smyly matchup. Did you know Drew Smyly pitched for the Phillies?
Future Cubs.
Yu pitched 7 scoreless innings, struck out 10, didn't walk anybody. Left with a 5-0 lead. And in the 8th, weird little lefty driving range ball picker-upper Kyle Ryan came in to pitch.
I remember. I'd completely forgotten about him.
Because Tony Kemp had pinch hit. Too great Tony Kemp had pinch hit for you in the 7th.
And he had some big hits, even though he was awful. Oh my god!
Against the Cardinals. Last series, he had a big home run.
So is this the Martin Maldonado year too? Is that 2019?
Yes.
He played the whole season. He played for the Cubs
for 2019.
Didn't get a hit.
They traded our hero from 2016, Mike Montgomery, for him.
And I think they traded him for Tony Kemp then. Is that what we got for him?
Yeah, sounds right.
So anyway, Kyle Ryan comes in. He gives up a double to Roman Quinn. And then he walks Rhys Hoskins. But then he's got to face Bryce Harper. He gets him to ground out. So we're in good shape. Rowan Wick, who was being saved to try to close this one, had to come in the 8th. Struck out JT Realmuto. And then he gave up a single to Corey Dickerson, who would later hit a home run in the playoffs against the Cubs for the Marlins.
I think so.
2020.
Florida
Marlins.
In the pretend playoffs in 2020.
Right.
Single to right, and who was in right? Must have been Hayward.
They don't say who. They don't.
Quinn scored, and Rhys Hoskins got gunned out at the plate. So Cubs are still up 5-1. We're in good shape. Don't worry about it. Wick comes out to pitch the 9th with a 4-run lead. Gets Gene Segura to fly out Then there's an error on the third baseman, which I'm just going to guess is
No,
Bodie.
E6. It's
E6.
E6.
Addison Russell?
It's Bodie.
No, it's shortstop.
Bodie is short?
That's fucking right. They had to put Bodie as shortstop. Like, God
This was
damn it,
the
Theo.
team with all the
this?
shortstops. Oh, we got too many shortstops. So we do all these shortstops.
Mm-hmm.
Ran out of shortstops. But this is the Mike Freeman year too, then, right?
I remember this play listening to
And this
Virgil
is the
Patrick.
Nico. This is
was
Nico
driving
gets
around.
pressed into
Nico
service?
called up late in the year.
And
Series against the Pirates, I remember.
And he was doing everything he could to save their bacon too. He was excelling.
He had 2 homers, and they didn't hit another homer for like 2 more years.
Yes. I was there in one of those offensive explosion games against the Pirates at Wrigley. Yep.
This was the year Russell got hurt in Milwaukee, right? Did he get hit in the...
There for that game, too. He got hit in the head and then took his base and still stole second base, but then came out later in the game.
Yeah, and then he was out
He's no
concussion for the rest of the year. 18 was the year we found
Gonzalez.
out what a scumbag he was, and then we ended up having to... They put him on like the suspended list, and that's when they went out and got... why can't I think?
Daniel Murphy?
Daniel Murphy.
Yes, 18. Yeah,
19
later,
was the year that Javi had an MVP season, right, for most of the year, and then this the year?
That was 18.
18? 19 is the year Javi played most of the season on a bad foot, and then when they X-rated at the end, then he hurt something else, and at the end of the season they X-rated his foot, and they're like, oh yeah, it's really screwed up. So I'm glad you had him playing on it. But that's why at the end of this season they were out of shortstops again, because Russell was gone and Javi was gone.
And part of the reason for this collapse would be obviously the absence of Javi for a good stretch.
So
yeah, well, I think that the series right before the really bad series against the Cardinals, where they got swept at Wrigley, they played against the Reds, and I think they lost 2 out of 3. I want to say that series, like, Baez got hurt, Rizzo got hurt, I think Bryant might have gotten hurt, and that was like everything was it all seemed like it was falling apart, and then weirdly Rizzo shows back up like in one of the Cardinals games and hits a big home run.
Yeah, that was the year.
So does Javier Baez.
That was his really bad sprained ankle, right? And then they jammed it.
Yeah.
He could get it into a shoe, and he played, and he had a homer in his first.
I mean, Mike,
you're
talking the last 3 weeks of the season, Mike, right?
Yes.
Because that's where I see the sweep at home against the Cardinals. Okay, she's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that 9-game losing streak.
So anyway, Bodie makes the error. So now instead of there being a 4-run lead and 2 outs in the ninth, there's 1 out with a runner at first. Scott Kingery singles off of Wick. Then remember little Brad Miller? Like 1 year, he just all of a sudden hit homers out of nowhere. Not the guy who plays for the Bulls.
I was just going to bring him up.
No.
He singled to second base. I don't like the sounds of that. I guess it was just an infield hit. I guess ground ball is second and short. Scored Hernandez, who was an unearned run because of the error on Bodie. And then Kingery went to third. So now they bring Strope in. They give up on Wick. They bring Pedro in. Roman Quinn does it again. He singles to second base again. They're not even getting the ball out of the infield.
Yep.
Who the hell is at second base? Is it Descalso?
It is Ian Happ.
Ian Happ. Holy
Ian
shit.
Frickin' Happ.
Ian Happ and David Bodie. Our middle infield.
God.
Jesus.
He is the gift that keeps on.
And I used to earnestly wonder, why don't they just put Happ at second? Sorry, guys.
So Rhys Hoskins comes up and with 2 on, and Pedro hits him. So bases are loaded. Bryce Harper's coming up, and Joe apparently decides to bring in a lefty. Maybe he'll hit a double play and we'll get out of here. And he brings in Derek Holland, who on a 2-2 pitch gives up a 4,000-foot home run to Bryce Harper.
It was upper deck, I believe.
Very reminiscent of the Christopher Morel walk-off against the Sox, in which he sprinted around the bases.
Yeah.
Yeah,
actually, you're right. It's a good call.
Where were they at the trade deadline? They were...
So that's funny. That was only August 15th, but they were in first place. Man. I mean, I know we lived through it, but it's frustrating.
So
Again,
at the trade deadline, they were 57-50. They were tied with the Cardinals for first place, and we thought the trade deadline passed without a move. It was like 4 o'clock deadline, and the Cubs didn't do anything. And then all of a sudden, they make the announcement that they had traded for Nick Castellanos from the Reds, and we're like, I guess that's better than nothing. And Nick was like the only guy who hit for them for the.
Yeah, he tore it up down the stretch.
Yep.
He like set some record for like top 5 like single season in doubles, I think. Came like he came really close to hitting like 60 doubles that year. I remember he was leading the league in doubles at the time that they traded.
Yes, he ended up with 58. He had 37
Wow.
doubles in 100 games for the Tigers. And honestly, I think the only reason he probably didn't get 60 is because some of those doubles became homers at Wrigley.
Yep.
In 51 games for the Cubs, he hit 21 doubles and 16 homers, 36 RBIs.
Wow.
He hit 321, 356, 646. And he wanted to stay, like really bad. And the Cubs were like, oh no, we got Jason Hayward and we have Kyle Schwarber. Where are you going to play? And a year later, they would just DFA Kyle, and then they ended up.
Yep.
Now him and Nick are hanging out on the Phillies together, going to the playoffs every year. Good job, because he literally waited. He wouldn't sign with the Reds until they just kept waiting to see if Theo would make a move to open a spot. And they're like, well, there's no DH, so we can't. Well, little did they know that 2 years later there was going to be a DH, and they could have had it.
Yeah. I was talking to a coworker today who's from Philadelphia. I'm like, I really like that Philly team. You know, and I find myself mentioning Castellanos and Schwarber. I'm like, God damn it.
Well, and there's also the fact that Bryce Harper wanted to sign with the Cubs.
Correct. And he's likable in my book. So, yeah.
The Cubs were like, we're good. Where are we going to play?
Sucks because the Cubs have a need for a first baseman now when Harper is transitioned over to first base.
Well, if you get Chris Bryant back, he's going to play first for the Rockies, I saw.
For the Rockies for the 32 games he's healthy for. All right, so the trade deadline, they make the trade. They get Castellanos. They're tied with the Cardinals. They come out the very next day. We're going to set the tone for the playoff run, and they get beat 8-0 against the Cardinals. Good job.
Great.
Jack Flaherty over John Lester. But then they win the next 4 in a row, and they have a 2.5 game lead in first place. Yeah, everything's fine. Castellanos is ripping the ball. Yu's having a good year. On Sunday,
you bounced back
August
real
4th,
nice.
Tyler Chatwood got a save. Why not?
Yeah, they're gearing up.
Let's see. So
We're back, baby.
When did they get Kimbrel?
The Harper game was 2 weeks after that, but they were still kind of around first. They're winning and losing. They're not pulling away with it. What were you wondering about a game in particular, or?
No, I was just looking to see when they got Craig Kimbrel. So.
Oh, that's a good call.
You remember who they sent? What crack scout did they send to Craig Kimbrel's workout to decide that that's the guy they needed to sign? Do you remember?
No.
That's a name I should know?
Oh, it's a name you'll know. It's special assistant to the Cubs, David Ross. And he's like, oh, Craig's thrown great. And they're like, all right. So they signed.
You know what, though?
To a
it would make
2-year
sense
deal with
at
an
the
option,
time.
right? 3-year
It
deal
would make
with
sense at the maybe 2 with an option. It would make sense at the time because I think Ross did catch for Kimbrel when he was in Atlanta. So,
because Kimbrel would pitch for the Cubs in 19, 20, and then up until the deadline in 21.
Yes.
And the 21 season, and it was weird because like in 2019, we're going to talk about it. It was not so good. The beginning of 20 was horrible. Like embarrassingly bad. Cincinnati, he was throwing the ball at the backstop.
Yeah.
It was awful.
Mm-hmm.
But about 4 games into that short season, everybody stopped hitting him. And we didn't even notice because his stats were so terrible, and he wasn't closing at first. He was just picking spots.
It was a
and after a
while,
while,
season.
It's kind of like, when was the last time Kimbrel gave up a run? And it was a long time. And then in 21, he was amazing.
That went well into 21, really, until he basically left.
It went until he got to the White Sox.
Yeah, right.
So. Yeah.
Well,
but then the White Sox.
You guys talk. I'm going to look up and then I'm going to read
pull up his game log because I feel like he had original success. It was just the last 10 days of the season, and all of a sudden he had a straight as an arrow Kyle Farnsworth / Bob Scanlon.
He was really shaky. He got a save against his old team, the Braves, in his first game in 19. but I forget what happened.
I remember that.
He walked a guy, and then he gave up a hit and a walk, and Rizzo or somebody made a great play to end the game.
Yes.
And Craig Price kind of like, woo, well, at least the first one's out of the way.
I think that was on Memorial Day.
And he
right around there.
The next time he pitched, it was against the great Pirates, and he gave up 3 runs and 2 homers. Then he pitched against them the next day, and he gave up 2 more runs. Then he got through some scoreless outings against the White Sox, the Pirates. Actually, he went on a decent little run until the end of the month when he came in to get a save in the 10th inning against the Brewers and didn't get anybody out and gave up 3 runs and 2 homers. So we got to look at this.
There's that famous picture of like Jed Hoyer and Theo Epstein in like a booth somewhere in Milwaukee. That's where that originates from. I remember that picture. Yep.
Oh yeah, here it is. So the Albert Almora hit a homer in the top of the 10th to put the Cubs up 3-2 off of Freddie Peralta. And so here we go. The Cubs are going to get the win. And second pitch of his outing to Yelich, home run to left field. He walked Tyler Saladino, and then he gave up the walk-off to the great Keston Hiura.
Yep.
I remember now that you mentioned Hiura.
So that one was no good. Let's see.
Zoom tight.
Yeah, put the cough button on.
And then his last 3 appearances of this season were not so good, and they were a long ways away. So they must have shut him down. He pitched against the Brewers and gave up. He came in the 9th with them losing, just 1-0, and he made it 4-0. Then he was on the shelf for the next 18 days, and then he pitched twice again that awful series against the Cardinals.
Yeah, that's what it was. So he was coming in off of 2 weeks off. Baez was off for a few weeks. Remember, they pushed him back into the lineup at the end. He could barely stand up. So I had forgotten that Kimbrel. And,
I remember that. So, so this game on the 19th of September. Remember when the Cardinals were using Carlos Martinez as their closer? With the blue.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that.
So they have a 4-1 lead in the 9th, and they bring Carlos in, and he's going to nail things down. And he walks Castellanos, and he gives up a single to Bryant. And he strikes out Schwarber, but then Zobrist doubles to score a run. And then Wilson singles to him.
To Carlos Martinez.
Yes. And did he try to go home? I can't tell what he did.
They call it a fielder's choice if that was the case.
That's right. So just singled the pitcher. He just didn't field it successfully. That scored Bryant. Baez went to 3rd. They went to Andrew Miller, who they had signed after Tito wore him out in the World Series, just like Joe wore out.
That's right.
Aroldis.
Yeah.
And Hayward with a productive out. He grounded out, but Baez scored to tie the game. So here we go. Top of the 10th. Now. Kimbrel comes out.
Oh, yes. Matt Carpenter, right?
Strikes out Dexter Fowler. And then the emaciated corpse of Matt Carpenter.
I was at this game. Now it's all coming back to me.
I was playing softball at Hamlin Park for Cody's that night. I remember calling on the phone. Like, they actually came back 3 in the 9th, like you just described, and they could have actually walked it off. But Nico couldn't do it, and you can't blame Nico because he was great down the stretch. And then I was like, what the fuck? Matt Carpenter, that motherfucker took the Kimbrel yard? That was a bad sign. And that was the first of that weekend. It just gets worse. Go ahead, Mike.
And I said this pre-show. Going into this series, the Cardinals had maybe only won from like 2017 until this point. They'd only won like 3 games total at Wrigley. And I want to say maybe a week or 2 before this, they had some weird rain delay situation where they had to play like back-to-back double headers against the Reds on back-to-back days. And like everything lined up for the Cubs, if they could have just split that series. At worst, they would have wound up with one of the 2 wild card spots. Instead, they lay a giant egg when everything was looking like it was favoring them.
Andy, on the Saturday game, I direct you to the top of the 6 when the Cubs had a 1-0 lead because I had completely forgotten about that bump, the tomato can that came into pitch for the Cubs.
So that game is the game he just blew.
Thursday night. It's a 4-game
Thursday
series.
night. So then Friday,
yeah,
they is this the one you were talking about?
Yeah, top of the 6th. Cubs nursing a 1-0 lead.
Friday they go to he was a trade deadline acquisition, I believe, right? Probably off waivers. The great David Phelps with his slider of death.
From Toronto.
But the Cubs up 1-0 in the 6th. David Phelps came in. He came in a double switch that took Rizzo out. Was this the game? Was this Rizzo with his foot in the? They probably were taking him out.
I think so.
Yeah, that's what it was. He sprained his ankle fielding a bunt ground ball.
It was a Friday afternoon game. I kind of remember where I was. There was some weirdness going on here. Frustrating. Another frustrating game.
So Ian Happ is playing first base.
What could possibly go wrong?
Goldschmidt walks. Ozuna walks. Steve Cishek coming in. Why not? Steve's fresh. He has only pitched the last 14 days in a row. He walks. Matt Carpenter. Bases loaded. Nobody out. Yachty. Weak ground ball between short and second.
Right? Is it my prejudice or is it accurately a memory that it was the most seeing-eyest of singles? Or is there I feel like somehow for like one of the last times Yachty pulled some devil magic. I don't know.
There's Goldschmidt and Ozuna. The Cardinals go up 2-1. Cishek gets DeJong to pop up and Harris and Bader to fly out to right. Joe brings in Brad Wick. Hey, he was actually healthy enough to pitch once. And he gets
Wick brothers.
Gets Matt Wieters out. And then, let's see, do the Cubs? They rallied in the 7th.
Yeah.
They had runners at second and third with 2 outs. And Johnny Brett got Bryant to fly out.
They loaded the bases.
Yep.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, Bryant flat out deep. It's just frustrating.
Hayward, Horner, and Castellanos were on. Rowan Wick pitched around a walk, 2 walks and a single. Nobody scored, and the Cardinals didn't score in the 8th. Schwarber singled to lead off the 8th, but Contreras in a double play. In the 9th, Derek Holland walked Dexter and then picked him off. And he struck out Tommy Edman, and then Strope came in and got out of the inning. And in the 9th, down 1, Hayward popped up to short. Surprised he hit it that far. Nico popped out to short. His was a line drive, it says. Then Tony Kemp walked, and Ben Zobrist grounded out, and the Cubs lost. So now they
can salvage 2 out of 4.
Yep.
Let's see. They were only 2 games out on the Sunday before. Now they're on Saturday, and they're 5 out, hoping not to go 6 out. Things have gone. We are in the middle of the collapse right here.
Oh God.
Well, this is when you say 5 and 6 out, they're 5 and 6 out of the division
right,
race.
They're still in the wild card race.
Yeah, in the wild card race, I think they're not too far behind where the likes of Milwaukee and Washington are.
They just got to stop blowing games.
So this is the Saturday game. Saturday. Probably on, what time? 1:20, so it's local. It's not on Fox.
I feel like there were some rain delays and shit. It was gloomy out.
Cardinals score in the first. Cubs get 3 in the bottom of the first. Cardinals get 1 in the third and 3 more in the fourth. The Cubs get 2 in the bottom of the fourth. So they're down. So they're tied at 5. Cubs go ahead in the 6th. 6-5. Cardinals score twice in the top of the 7th. The Cubs battle back and they tie it. Let's see. How did they tie it in the 7th?
I remember watching this live and thinking
Marcell
this was
Ozuna had to hit a 2-run homer off Kyle Ryan, who was out picking up golf balls, to go up 7-6. Oh, the Cubs had a lead. I can't do math. So the Cubs down by a run in the 7th. Schwarber struck out. Zobrist doubled. Tony Kemp. Giovanni Gallegos balked Zobrist to third. Tony Kemp homered. Attaboy.
Yes.
Yep.
And Wrigley's wild with ecstasy. The Cubs are up
Tony,
8-7.
little Tony Kemp pulls it out for us.
Brad Wick pitches around a hit by pitch in the 8th, the bottom of the 8th. The Cubs don't do anything. So here we go. Craig Kimbrell, second appearance since he came off the disabled list.
Yeah.
Gonna nail this down, save things for the Cubs. The first pitch he threw, Yachty hit a home run to center field. The second pitch he threw, Paul DeJong hit a home run to center field.
I thought Goldschmidt factored into that, but I had the wrong Paul.
Well, there was a stretch there where Paul DeJong hit a home run every time he was played at Wrigley. And that's long gone. So Carlos Martinez came in to try to close it in the 9th. He walked Bryant. The incredibly talented Robel Garcia struck out. Who knew Robel would strike out?
Remember Robel? I remember Robel Garcia.
I remember that little. Yep.
He was like a Mexican League guy or something, yeah.
Zobrist lined out, and Javi struck out in the game.
And it gets worse.
Javi was back. He only played a few games, right? And
he was broken. He should probably not have been out there.
He shouldn't have been.
And remember, he came up and the place was going crazy because I don't think he had. I'm gonna have to look. I don't think he had played. And they were like, they're like, hey, Javi is available off the bench, and then they used him, and that's good.
I think at this point in the season, wasn't there some report that came out from one of Addison Russell's former partners that confirmed that he had done what was alleged, and that because of that he was put on the restricted list and wasn't available to play? That sounds about right.
It does. I don't remember the whole saga of if it happened to him twice or not. It probably did. By then everybody just wanted him to go away.
But that killed the Cubs, and both
Javi and Kimbrell were shut down on September 1st. And then Javi came back. Ironically, they both played on the 19th and the 21st. Javi came in and what did he do? He didn't bat. He has to pinch run. That's a good thing. Guy with a bad foot. And then on the game on the 19th, and the game we just said, he pinch hit in the 9th and struck out. He would only play. He would play the next day. He would play the Sunday, and then he would play twice more. But he never played more than an inning in any of those games.
I believe there's a fourth game to that Cardinals series.
There was. This was one that I was in attendance for in the bleachers. I think I remember too, there was a big to-do because the thing was announced either the night before or earlier that day before the game that it would be Gary Pressey's final game as Cubs organist.
Oh, how sad.
Yeah.
Another gloomy day is what I remember.
Yep.
And but they're not dead. So I'm getting real 2004 vibes here because it's
So this is
they have these Bryce Harper punches, but they can still win these games, and they're constantly.
This one's Yu Darvish against Miles Michaelis.
That's the Mark Pryor analogy. This is where the 2004 analogy in this game is the Mark Pryor strikes out 17.
Yeah.
Yu Darvish pitched this day. I remember.
We need Darvish to just salvage it, and he does. He absolutely steps up, but the offense again doesn't score.
You pitched 8 in the third. Gave up 7 hits and 3. I ended up giving up 3 runs, but 8 in the third, 7 hits, struck out 12, and he had the Cubs had a 1. What is it? 1-0 lead.
Go to the top of the 9th.
1-0 lead.
Cubs had a 2-0 lead in the top of the 9th.
But before we get to the 9th, check what Chris Bryant did in his first plate appearance. If I remember right, he grounded out to short or third and slipped on the bag, and I don't think he played another game the rest of that season. And I thought it was going to be another career jeopardizing injury for him.
He was hit by a pitch his first time, and he survived to come back in and hit into a 5-4-3 double play in the third.
And he may have been taken out.
Replaced at third by Ian Happ. Right after that.
So good call,
Ian Happ.
Fucking Happ. Every time he shows up, it's bad news.
It is.
Yep.
It is.
No wonder we hate that guy.
It's a good call, Mike.
Sorry to take us away from what happened in the ninth inning.
That's a key point.
Um,
Yeah, because what Baseball Reference is going to show you is that Jose Martinez, that long arm freak, it's a leadoff triple off of you. But that is I will just tell you, and I'm going to try to find it on YouTube. But that is an absolute misplay by Almora. That was when because like Andy, you might even remember, like I was still defending Almora. I was getting bitchy, like because he could still he had good routes, even though he was slow. He was a decent outfielder, and he just so misplayed a ball. I was like, all right, we know you can't hit anymore. Right? I don't harbor any illusions that you're going to help this team in offense. But the least you can do is fucking flag down a ball that your pitchers, pick him up. He's been busting his ass all game, and he misplayed it like a goof. He just gotten so bad that even his defense is worthless. And that was it. And that was Darvish had to come out of the game because of his incompetence.
If you're actually able to find this clip on YouTube too of Jose Martinez hitting that triple, you might see me in that because I was actually sitting on the right field side of the bleachers in the first or second row at the time. And I remember at first expecting that Almora had caught it and almost celebrating, and then I hear the rest of the crowd groan. I'm like, what just happened? Oh my God. Yeah. And the season was basically over at that point.
I mean, maybe they did us a favor because they were skidding anyway, but it's like you just win a game here, for Christ's sake.
So in the bottom of the eighth with the Cubs up 2-1, Darvish hit for himself, which, because we just detailed how awful the bullpen was, you can see why he was still in. He grounded out, but then Rizzo singled, and Javi pinch ran for it, which I just find crazy. I think Javi was out because of he'd hurt his wrist or something, right? But he had the bad foot, which had hurt him. So him running was just stupid. Then Castellanos lined out, but Happ singled. So they had to go to the bullpen. They went to Tyler Webb. How do you tie your ties, Ty? And
Ty Webb.
Schwarber lined out, so the Cubs didn't score. And that necessitated a flurry of Joe Maddon moves. Happ went from third to first. Bodie went into play third. Castellanos moved from right to left. Almora came in for Schwarber, which moved Hayward from center to right. And then rewrite. Jose led off, pinch hitting for Tyler Webb and tripled with an asterisk. Tyler O'Neill ran for him. Dexter tied the game with a sac fly. Boo, Dexter, traitor. Then Edmund singled off you, and Edmund stole second with Goldschmidt up. Goldschmidt hit a double off you, which scored Edmund, which gave him the lead. Strop came in for you. Ozuna walked, and then Molina and Jairo Munoz both struck out. In the ninth, the Cubs, Zobrist popped out, Contreras struck out, Hayward singled, and then Nico flew out to center, and the Cubs lost.
Yep. And I remember reading that was the first time the Cardinals had swept a 4-game series at Wrigley since pre-World War II or something like that.
All right.
Which, yeah.
And they were
specifically a 4-game series. Yeah.
And the Cubs led in the ninth in 3 of them, and then lost one in the 10th. That was 5-4, 2-1,
tied it in the
9-8,
ninth,
and
one of them.
3-2. Then they went to Pittsburgh, where they're going to get right, and they got swept.
Yep.
Still 0-4.
So then Friday they come back. They beat the Cardinals 8-2. After the game, Joe Maddon informs his team he's out at the end of the season.
Yeah.
End of an era.
Those games I remember being still meaningful for the Cardinals. I think them and the Brewers were battling it out at that point for the division. Whoever didn't get it got the wild card. Sorry to make you look up a million things at once here, Andy.
That's right. Let's see, what was
I did find a clip. Almora doesn't look that ridiculous, but bad jump. I dropped it in the Twitter group chat.
Saw that.
That was when
the
I
Cardinals
was
ended up 2 games ahead of the Brewers, 7 games ahead of the Cubs. The Cubs missed the wild card by, let's see, quite a bit. because the Nationals won 93 games. So the Cubs were.
Honest to God, I feel like this was a competition for the comparison to 2023. I feel like 04, 19, and 23 are all these like true late season, just absolute collapses. I don't know. I'm almost getting confused because I've been drinking beer for how long have we been doing this? 3 hours?
Two and a half.
Pushing it, yeah.
I was just looking because this was the Cardinals made it to the NLCS, but they in the DS they had a decisive fifth game against the Braves in Atlanta.
And they blew them out.
They scored
That's
10
right.
runs in the first inning.
Yep, I remember that. Enjoy it.
Didn't last. That wasn't future Cub Sean Newcomb, was it? That was Mike Foltynewicz.
Yes.
I thought you were going to say current White Sox Mike Soroka. But
ooh.
Well, that ended up obviously being literally the end of an era. That was it for Joe. And they couldn't wait to get to the great David Ross, who was going to fix all this stuff, because what this team really needed was more rules and more batting practice. That was why they weren't. And so they got rules and they got batting practice, and then they fired him. So good.
And I will say in Ross's defense that in his record-matching 5 years as Cubs manager, he too has presided over a collapse. So, you can't. It took him to the playoffs. He had a collapse.
Every Cubs manager gets at least one, it seems like, except for,
I don't know.
Dale Swaim and Rick Renteria.
I don't. Well, in the modern era, we got Baylor had a collapse. We got Dusty's collapse. We threw in Lou's collapse. Yeah, I guess you're right. We kind of
not Quaddy. Mike Quaddy didn't.
Yeah, Quaddy didn't. Well,
Quaddy's
whole second season was a collapse from the very beginning.
Right. And there's no Dale Swaim collapse and no Renteria collapse, because Renteria is actually part of the ascension. He just didn't know it.
Yeah, so you have to go. Zimmer never had a collapse.
Nope. I mean, no, 91 was just underachieving from opening day. So that's the closest you'd come to it.
You wouldn't count Jim Lefevre in 93, right?
No,
they never really contended.
They actually went like 20. They actually went 20-7 or something in September. They finished 500 for the first time ever in my lifetime without winning the division. Yeah. And he still lost his job.
I had Lefevre fever, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man.
So I think I don't know. If I was going to say that maybe this one was more like this last year, even than 04. But I don't think it was. I think it's worse.
I think so, too. Because this is like the beginning of the end of the World Series core.
That's true.
Whereas, 2023, for as bad as it was down the stretch, this was kind of like the first step towards something that we hope could be good.
And in spite of the fact that Arizona went to the series, do you really think this team was built to do that? Unlike the 04 and the 19 Cubs.
Yeah, the 23 Cubs would have played the Brewers in the first round and gone home. I think. I don't know. It's because of Woodruff's injury. They couldn't beat. And they had the weird thing where they would actually beat Corbin Burns. The Cubs handled
2 or 3 times.
Corbin.
Yes.
They don't hit Freddie Peralta at all, so that would have been a problem in game 2. But
well, the fact that they kept hitting Burns' ears back just means that at some point they're not. It's probably going to happen. It would happen in an opportune time, like the playoffs.
Like it would have been the reverse Dwight Gooden, where the first time the Cubs faced him in '84, they did well against him, and then never again. Well, the Cubs did well against Corbin Burns historically, but the one time it was the most important in the playoffs, he probably would have come up big.
Well, you're saying that going up against him in the season opener in the end of June in a pandemic year isn't an important.
July. Yeah.
July. Oh, yeah, it was July. It was beautiful. It was like 80 degrees on opening day.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then even say they had gotten past the Brewers, they would not have done to the Dodgers what the Diamondbacks did. They might have been able to hit Clayton Kershaw, but they would have. The Dodgers would have scored runs against the Cubs, and that would have been the end of that. And then, so the biggest argument, and to Cubs fans' credit, I don't hear a lot of people making it. This idea that we're only a game worse than the Diamondbacks and they went to the World Series. The thing that flies in the face of that is you played them 7 times in September and they beat you 6 times.
6 times, yeah.
Right.
So it's not like you weren't close. You literally proved on the field that you were not close to the Diamondbacks. They were significantly better than you. Because had you won simply 3 of those games, you could have still had a losing record against them. You would have gone to the playoffs, and you didn't.
So I think we agree 19 is slightly worse than 23 because of a lot of those factors.
Yeah. I mean,
as it collapse,
19, the 19 Cubs actually have more of an excuse, right? With the injuries.
Yes. Like you said, Baez and,
Well,
but you can also look at it and say they had better players. But I guess if those guys are hurt and they're not in the lineup, they don't have better players.
The thing is, though, it was kind of a self-inflicted excuse because of how how much Ricketts tightened the purse strings for the first time in a while that offseason before.
Yes, they should have had depth, and they didn't have it because they decided they didn't want to spend for it. And that's what happens. Then guys get hurt, and you don't have anything to back it up. I mean, they got it. And how bad would they have been if they hadn't made the trade for Castellanos?
Yeah.
I mean, he hit unbelievably well, and they still couldn't win.
Well, remember the Pacoda projections going into that season had them only winning 79 games? They don't make that trade for Nick Castellanos. Yeah. Maybe that comes true.
19, I remember that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So for at least the last quarter century, it comes down to 04 and 19 then, sounds like, comparing the two.
Yeah.
A lot of similarities.
Yeah, the only one of those teams that brought their manager back was Dusty.
Right.
Joe was gone and Ross is gone.
Well, 01 Baylor was back in 02, but among
the
you would think these are the 3 most similar.
Right.
Yes. The three worst collapses of the last 25 years. I think we got that 04, 19 this past year, but this past year gets eliminated between 04 and 19. Between those two, 19 was really breathtaking. They both were breathtaking at the end. And you just, I don't know, I'm prejudiced, but I tried to give it some objective thought, but to me, it's always going to be 04.
Well, and it just felt like because they had been in the playoffs in 15 and 16 and 17 and 18, that they were just going to figure it out and make it in 19. Right? Even as you were starting to go down the stretch and the wheels were falling off.
Yep.
They would never fall far enough out of the wild card race that you would be like, we're screwed. He's like, okay, they'll figure it out. And then they just never could figure it out.
Yeah, it was kind of sudden. Like we didn't expect it, even though 5 years earlier they sucked ass. So we thought we'd go to the playoffs like 10 years. But 04.
Yeah. At least,
I mean,
they haven't been back since.
Well, since 19?
Yeah.
Well, 20.
Oh, I
20.
forgot.
Come on.
20.
Come on.
Does 20 count? Really? There was an extra playoff team. He only played 60 games. The Cubs had a losing record from the 17th game of the season to the end of the season. I mean, I know it counts. They won the division. Ooh.
They did win the division.
The Central sent 4 teams, and they combined to win 1 game.
1 game. Cardinals against Padres.
The Cubs scored 1 run. I think the Reds only scored 1.
No, Reds got shut out the
They
whole
score any.
time.
That's right. They had that ridiculous extra inning game to start it against the Braves. Then I don't know how many of the Brewers scored. The Cardinals did. The Cardinals actually blew. They got up 1-0 and then blew the 2 games to the Padres in spectacular.
That's
fashion.
right.
Yeah.
And Trevor Bauer won the Cy Young
over you,
despite the fact you was better.
I mean,
they could reassign that now.
I remember you and Fells talking about this when he was part of the podcast, saying that like it's kind of unfair that they even awarded an MVP and a Cy Young that year when you're not playing the entire National League and the entire American League.
Well, and the Cub offense wasn't good. Remember, they couldn't find a DH that could ever get a hit. They had the great Jose Martinez, and he didn't get a hit. He got 1. I remember making the case that one of the reasons you deserve the Cy Young over Bauer is that you didn't get to pitch against the Cubs. Like Bauer pitched against him 3 times, I think. It's like,
yeah,
Cubs don't have an offense, and you doesn't get to pitch against them. It's not fair. Because I think Burns or Woodruff, I think, finished 3rd, right? In the Cy Young that year, it was everybody in the Central. And it's because actually none of those teams could really hit.
Right. You know what would have clinched it for you is if he did something that you suggested around that time.
Pitch left-handed.
Just pitch left-handed on his off days.
Yes. So he cannot retire without at least pitching to one batter left-handed. He can't do it. I mean, just for fun, he throws bullpens left-handed between starts. And apparently he throws in the high 80s with a good breaking ball. I need to see it. Why would you have that talent and not use it? It makes no sense.
I'm just imagining that if you're a kid that was born in 2012, you're probably just a little too young to remember the 2016 World Series. But if you're into baseball, you probably remember 2019 and 2023. Yeah. Throwing that one out there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even 2010. You might not even... You would have known about the Cubs in 2016. Just imagining on the other side of the World Series.
Jose Martinez, 0 for 21 with the Cubs.
Wow. He pulled a Maldonado. I thought somehow he had gotten 1 hit.
I mean, at least Josh Fegley was 1 for 16.
Josh Fegley.
Billy Hamilton had 300 for him. He was 3 for 10.
Remember vaguely Billy Hamilton.
So many guys on here because the roster was big, right? Because of like the
COVID. You're talking about 2022.
Vargas, Steven Souza Jr. got released in the middle of a doubleheader. That's just one of my favorite things. And Ross kept using Victor as the DH, and it's like he can't hit. Just stop. All right, one last.
I remember that
nothing to do with the rest of this podcast, but I want to see what Cubs DH has hit in 2020 because I know it's going to depress me.
Talk about a collapse.
Well, I remember that you caught, or Victor caught you very well during that Cy Young runner-up.
Well, that's why he went to San Diego
campaign. They went to San Diego together, and it pissed me off that like they could only acquire a bunch of guys who had never even played in a professional game at that point because there was no minor league season in 2020. You know, they should have got more value for trading away the Cy Young runner-up and his personal catcher together in the same deal.
Cub designated hitters in 2020 hit 192, 312, 318. Like, Dave, do you know what a designated hitter is supposed to do? But honestly, the Cubs didn't hit for shit. This offense was embarrassing. They were, out of 15 teams, they were 13th in hits, 10th in runs, which is actually not as bad as I thought, but it's bad. They led the league in strikeouts. Anyway, I'm telling you, that's why you should have won the Cy Young, because you didn't get to pitch against that juggernaut. Their best hitter was Jason Hayward, and he only hit for like 3 weeks.
I think Ian Happ had a pretty good year.
Yeah,
like
Happ
a pretty good
year. Happ and Hayward. Yeah. Happ had a 131 OPS plus, and Hayward 129. All right. Well, there you go. Everything you ever want to know about Cubs collapses from 2001 to the present.
I can't wait till we do 2.5 more hours with Frank on the compliment.
That'll be a great one.
Technically, there might be a few more seasons.
Yeah. Well, and we're not going to remember any of this shit, so he's going to have to carry the load.
Put it in the can. Good times, guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Good times. Thank you.
Many of us have herpes.
It's fitting. It's got to be done with one of the best games of all time. Just unbelievable. Got to congratulate the Dolan family.